Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Guess what today is? Shit. I just realized, but by saying guess what today is, the day that you listen to this isn't the day that I'm recording this. So, the day that I'm recording this is National Coffee Day, which is great because I can do my ad read for Black Rifle Coffee. But I'm not so sure they're still going to have the sale going on because it's like 4 days before you guys are going to hear this. And gals, sorry, didn't mean to be non-inclusive there. If they're still doing the sale, and they have a blend of coffee coming out called Dictator Geisha, which is spectacular. Tasting notes on that would be mahogany, chocolate, leather-bound books, all the traditional higher class, upper class, however you would want to describe it. But what I'm looking at on their website right now today is a buy one, get one 50% off. So you could get a Dictator Geisha, and then you could get another bag of coffee, whatever you may like. You could also join the coffee club and get 25% off your first order. So it's going to be like a surprise for you and a surprise for me. You need to go to blackriflecoffee.com to see if they're even doing this sale. And if they're not, well, that sucks. And I guess that's what happens when you do the ad read a few days, before the coffee comes out or the episode comes out. But I digress. blackriflecoffee.com. Go there, check it out. Even if they're not doing the sale, it's still worth every single penny. Love their coffee, love the brand, love who founded it, love what they stand for. All of those great things. Should I shut up about the business side of the house? I agree with you. My guest today is Alan Mack. Now, if you're a fan of the podcast and you listened previously to an episode I did with Clay Hutmacher, he was a pilot in the TF-160th, and through Clay, I was introduced to Alan, who was also a pilot in the TF-160th. He was involved with that command for nearly 17 years. He carried in the horse soldiers at the very beginning of the war in Afghanistan in 2001. He was shot down during Operation Anaconda. Neil Roberts actually fell out of his helicopter. If you ever heard the story of Roberts Ridge. He was the overall flight lead for Operation Earned Respect, which was the recovery of the fallen soldiers in Operation Red Wings and the rescue of Marcus Luttrell, among many, many other things. He wrote a book called Razor 03 and Night Stalker's Wars, and it has just come out, actually. I love having guests like this on because it provides a better perspective and optic of what it takes to actually conduct warfare at the highest levels. I think it's really easy to just focus on, the Delta Force guys or the SEALs or Special Forces, and all that is great. They do amazing things. But if people think that they do those things in a vacuum, by themselves, unsupported, you're out of your fucking mind because it takes a village for sure. And how about I shut up because we talk about that in the episode. Episode number 253 with Alan Mack. I hope you enjoy.
Okay, I got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
We're off. Razor 03, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to anybody, but I have had an LLC for 8 or 9 years now. Mm-hmm. Razor 01 LLC.
No kidding.
Because when I was creating it, I was actually working with a guy who used to be in the back of the helicopters. And we were talking about how it's so easy to focus on the people who run out of the helicopter and what they do on target, and how easy it is to forget everything that actually makes that possible. From getting the helicopters overseas. I don't know shit about helicopters. I suspect they require maintenance of some kind, gas, all the little things that probably keep you up in the air. Mm-hmm. And I believe, because I know you were actually piloting the aircraft, but wasn't it the call sign of your aircraft? Or no, it was the aircraft that crashed and didn't recover on Roberts Ridge, correct?
No, that was Razor 1.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
And so that's talking with my friend, we were talking about it. I was like, you know what? What better way to pay respect and homage to the overall community than leading with that, as opposed to Trident 01 or whatever stupid-ass name I probably would have come up with on my own. So there you go.
Yeah, well, nice.
I mean, we're basically the same. you know, you Razor 03. I think I outrank you because I'm Razor 01, but
Yeah. No, the Razors, you know, it was funny in the beginning of Enduring Freedom, you know, the call signs actually rotated. So because of the ATO process, you know, the scheduling process for aircraft, whatever the first aircraft up was Razor 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. And then what happened over time is I kept getting Razor 3, and then even if I had an opportunity to use Razor 1, I'd say, hey, can I be Razor 3 tonight? You know?
I mean, if it's working, don't change it.
Yeah.
What do you get any ability to change or choose the call sign, or did they say, hey, it's Razor and you can add the number to it?
Oh, no, this is great. You know, they give you a, you know, CENTCOM or whoever it is, you know, they give you a list of computer-generated words that generally can't be pronounced phonetically.
Perfect.
You know? And so we sat down and we looked at these. We were in Uzbekistan at the time, October 4th, right after 9/11, and we were trying to pick our call signs. Here's a stack of call signs. Pick from this. So there was 4 MH-47 Echoes, right, Chinooks, specially modified, and we had 3 MH-60 DAPs, right? 2 of them flyable, 1 was a spare.
I love DAPs, by the way.
Oh, they're awesome, right?
They fuck shit up.
They are my favorite rotary wing cast platform.
For people who have no idea what we're talking about already, just go to YouTube and put in DAPS or maybe like helicopter or gun run, and you're going to get everything you could possibly need.
Oh, definitely. But the cool thing is they were not in the room when we chose the call signs. So we were Razor, and we were patting ourselves on the back. All right, that's a cool call sign. And they were Sponge.
That's terrible.
It is terrible. And they came in, they're like, hey, what the hell? And I'm like, hey, you should have been here, you know? And it was after that, somebody, actually after Tarkugar, when we had aircraft lost, that somebody said, you know, you don't want a stupid call sign because that's what ends up for the rest of the life is, remember what happened to, you know, Bozo 01, you know?
Yeah,
So, no.
that's actually really, that's good. It's not good to memorialize that.
Yeah.
They used to let us choose our objective names.
Yeah.
And it got a little wild, as you probably know, because you were in on the briefings. And then it was, hey, here's your templated target deck for the evening.
Right.
Yeah, well, we jumped ahead. Let's go way back. I mean, obviously, you were in the Army. Not an aviator first, or did you go straight in for aviation?
No, I was a aircraft mechanic. So, you know, you go way back into the, you know, late 60s, early 70s. Vietnam War was still going on. You know, as a kid, watching the evening news, and there's always Hueys on there, right? And I was like, I want to do that. I want to fly Hueys. I want to fly assault. And, you know, I go to the recruiter when I'm about to graduate high school, and I say, hey, I want to fly helicopters. I hear you can go from high school to flight school. And the guy goes, oh, slow down, kid. You know, pump the brakes. Sure, technically that can happen, but, you know, what we're going to do is you're going to join the Army in aviation, learn the, you know, the craft and the environment, and then you put in for flight school, and it's much easier. You know, it's a recruiter thing, but it was true. You know, I did 9 years enlisted. I was E6 and decided.
And mechanic on the mechanic side of the house the whole time?
Yep.
What kind of airframe were you working
on? So I
on?
worked on UH-1 Hueys, OH-58, Alpha Charlies.
Are those the Kiowa?
Yeah, but it was
a ball on the top?
Well, they didn't have that back then.
Okay.
It was a straight up, you know, clock and compass aircraft back then. And Cobras, which were really cool to work on. So I did that for 9 years and decided I was going to either go to flight school or get out. At that time, I was in West Germany. And a lot of people, you know, it's funny, the people that listen to this now are like, West Germany, what's that? You know?
They're just used to hearing Germany.
Yeah. And so you had, the wall was still up, and it actually came down while I was in flight school.
What was it like being stationed over there when there was West Germany and then Eastern Germany?
That was awesome. You know,
was it more, I mean, how contentious actually was it? Or was it kind of just business as normal being stationed over there as a U.S. service member?
No, for a U.S. service member, it was business as usual. I mean, you just brought your family over. It was great. You know, unless you were in one of those units up near Fulda or something like that on the Gap, which is where they expected the Soviets to roll through. So those guys were always, you know, flying the border. I was in a VIP unit, so I didn't have any scares there.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of funny, when we get to Uzbekistan, right after 9/11, the commander of the base had been in Fulda, you know, in a Warsaw Pact unit, and one of our CW4s, or CW5, I guess at the time, he had been an OH-58 pilot, and they had been assigned on opposite sides of the border at the same time. And,
no way.
Yeah, and they ended up there's a long story there, but this pilot ended up being our liaison, if you will, to the Uzbeks. And I don't mean like an LNO. I mean, he was the drinking buddy of the colonel that was in charge of the air base, which paid dividends.
I was going to say that might actually have more influence and power than a liaison.
Oh, it did. It really did. Because the Uzbek government, though they allowed us to come into Karshi-Kanabad, or K2, they didn't really want us to fly, and the air defense network of the Uzbekistan military wanted to shoot us down. Right?
Really?
Yeah. So that's a whole...
That's not favorable.
No, it's not. So we would, just to get in and out of Uzbekistan, we'd have to run the radar jammers and all our countermeasures and kind of be sneaky and get out. But this colonel told us about it, and he kind of told us how to, defeat it.
Yeah.
And get out. So it was fun when we would come back from a mission. You could you cross this ridgeline. We call it the Bear. Right? And it's actually in the book. There's a picture of a map with what looks like a Soviet bear. But you come across the Bear, which was the first ridgeline to the east, and you'd call up the tower. So you're like 40 miles out. You say, "Hey, we got you in sight," and they couldn't see us on the radar or in sight because it's nighttime.
Yeah. And you guys like to fly like 4 inches off the ground.
Right. And now we're doing this on purpose to mess with the tower controllers. So we're using every bit of, small hill and, swales and things like that to get in as close as we can. And we get like 4 or 5 miles out and pop up and like, "Hey, we're here." And they were pissed. But it was fun.
I don't know if I would play those games with people that have surface-to-air missiles or anti-aircraft weaponry. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun. If it weren't that, we were obviously flying at night stalkers, and all the, K2 was building up rapidly. So all the support personnel would come in that were daywalkers, and they'd, complain that the Chinooks were in their way. Why are those Chinooks in the way? They never move. We're like, we're out every night.
Yeah, move all the time, just not when you're awake.
And, we were, in those early days, we were coming back, not thinking we're going to live, right? So we're a little upset when they're like, "Oh, they're out. Not doing anything." So we made every effort to fly over the camp when we got back.
Oh, perfect.
Right.
Probably right over the berthing quarters would be the best.
That's it.
Yeah.
It was tents and stuff. And so we would come in, and the tower controllers, first time we did it, we just went right over the top. Next night, "Hey, I want to straight in on this." And the tower controllers say, "Negative. Can't fly over the compound." "Okay, I'd like to do a left 270 followed by a right turn and a left base." And they go, "Okay. Sure." And they'd watch us. And we would talk to these guys about 2 or 3 months later. And every night we wanted to see how creative you could get to end up over the tents. So that was fun.
I appreciate it. Well, so you worked 9 years, turning wrenches broadly on these things to keep them up in the air. I think, by the way, the Huey, the UH-1, might be my favorite sounding helicopter.
Yeah.
It is so distinct. The choppiness of that. 47s, though, also very distinct. Mm-hmm. I hate to say it to the 60 drivers out there. It's just kind of middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great aircraft.
It is a great aircraft, but from an audible perspective, I'm going to give them a C.
Yeah. Okay.
UH-1 gets an A.
Yeah.
47s, A-.
Okay. I'll take that.
Yeah. How was the transition from turning wrenches on them to actually getting in the cockpit? And then how did you work your way to the 160th? Because I'm assuming you didn't graduate flight school, and they're like, "Welcome aboard, sir."
No, that was a couple of years. But I get in. Flight school at that time was about 8 months long, because you had to start out as a warrant officer candidate, right? So that was like, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks or something like that of, they shave your head, and then you're folding your towels. I could break a window with a T-shirt.
Like an officer and a gentleman type stuff.
Yes. Yep. Just like that. And you would, things like you take your T-shirt and you'd fold it a certain way, and you'd starch it, and then you'd roll it a certain way, and then you'd wrap a for sale sign, right? Those plastic for sale signs with rubber bands, and put it on a lamp and bake it, right?
So it'd always be pristine.
Yeah. Right. You couldn't wear your stuff, otherwise it would.
I still fold my T-shirts the same way I did in boot camp. What I will say about Navy boot camp is they have a solid way to fold undergarments.
Yeah, I don't do that. I just throw it in the drawer. And my wife's like, "What are you doing?" I am not doing what I did in flight school. But, that's sort of, it's a little bit of, I talk about it in the book, actually. It's straight up hazing, not in a bad way, but in a way that kind of builds character.
It's over-the-top discipline.
Yeah.
For people who don't understand why they do that, for clarity, I don't necessarily understand why they do that, but it's just, it's this degree of attention to detail that they can then build upon later
Right.
on, is
And
what
then-
I would say.
So there's attention to detail and prioritization, right? So
Yeah.
they give you more work than you can do, and you've got to decide what you're going to take the ass chewing for, because you're going to get one no matter what.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. But a lot of guys don't understand that when they get in. It's like, well, maybe if I do this, they won't yell at me. Right.
Yeah,
It's
you're
like-
going to get yelled at. It's just a matter of what you're going to get yelled at for.
Right. Right. So, we did that, and
And you're not flying at all at the,
No.
what'd you call it, walk?
walk.
Yeah.
Warrant Officer candidate. Yeah. No, that's in Company A, and then when you graduate that, you go to Company B, which is primary flight, and that's where you learn to fly. And the Army had just transitioned away from the TH-55 helicopter. It's just a little two-seater.
Like a Magnum PI bird? No, because that's the MHs.
Much smaller. And it had if you applied power and gave it left pedal, you had to give it more throttle. So there was no auto power control. So it was it's like a kit helicopter almost.
Okay.
Yeah, but they used that for years, and it was a good trainer. But they used the UH-1, so that's what I learned on.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was, because that's exactly what I wanted to fly. So you go through that, and then you get to advanced tactics, and that's Charlie Company, right? So you're moving up to different companies.
How long is the B company?
It's 5-6 months, depending.
A couple hundred flight hours at the end of that, maybe?
Yeah, you end up with 260 hours total.
Okay.
By the time you're done. Like advanced is really, it's formation flying, tactical navigation, that kind of stuff. But it was a lot of fun, and you weren't. See, nowadays they make them a Warrant Officer 1 after that first, couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back then you stayed a walk the whole way through, and the only benefit you had is you were a senior candidate, and when you were in Charlie Company, and you wore a little black tab on your name tag, and that meant you go to the O Club and you were saluted by the other candidates. So you were treated like an officer, but you weren't getting paid like one.
It's interesting they kept you in that probationary status, for lack of a better word, for so long.
Yeah, and they would use it to their advantage. Of
course they would.
If you stepped out of line, they just take your senior status. You were still a senior, but you didn't wear the tab. So you were, had to shave your head again. You didn't wear a colored ball cap. You wore a camouflage hat or something. But so you graduate, you get your bar, you get your wings, and it's a specific order. First of all, you're a officer in the Army, so you get your bar. The next day, they give you your wings, and then they do some other celebration. But that's good. And then what happened with me is the Chinook community was always very, very senior. It was considered a reward for good service in Vietnam to get, a Chinook transition for a warrant officer. Yeah.
Huh.
So they were all W3s and 4s. W5 didn't exist at the time, and they all were retiring at the same time. You see that now with the airlines, right? Same kind of thing. So the only thing they could do was take W1s, which was sacrilege to the Chinook community. So the only metric they had was grade point average, right? So they looked at our class. I had a class of 75. I was number 1. So they took me and the guy that was like, 0.0001 grade point behind me, and we got a Chinook transition. And I remember being pissed. And I was like, I don't want to fly Chinooks. I want to fly Assault, right? And the instructors were looking at me like, you moron, you want to fly Chinooks. I'm like,
You
no.
just got the golden goose.
Yeah, I want to fly Assault. I want to go in the Cav. And they're like, no, you don't. So I'm like, great. We're going to fly from airport to airport. It's going to suck. Turned out that wasn't the case. And I graduated from there and went to Savannah, Georgia as my first assignment, just as Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So that set me up for going to Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And we were also in Savannah, Georgia. We were right next door to the 3rd of the 160th, which had Blackhawks and Chinooks. And a lot of the pilots in my unit knew the pilots and crew chiefs in the 160th. So they would mix a little bit.
Okay.
But I was a young Woj, Warrant Officer Junior. Like, Woj, take out the trash. Yeah, yes, sir.
So where do they, we're talking, I have my fixed wing licenses. There's some differences going from single engine to multi-engine, and then, the step up to the turbine from there. How much more complicated is it flying? And people are going to get lost in our terminology, and that's fine. They can look, UH-1 is a Huey. MH-47 broadly is a Chinook, which has got 2 rotor blades on top. two, what do you guys call them, pylons or
There's
rotor roots?
Forward nav pylon. You got
Yeah.
2 counter-rotating rotor heads. Looks like a couple of palm trees mating in a dumpster, is what they say.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine, I never really paid a lot of attention to what you guys were looking at up front, but I bet it's more complicated than the Huey. So how was that transition from one to the other?
It was easy. It's just a matter of the way the Army does things, with the rote memorization. You just get in and you just memorize. And then, you learn to put it in context, and then it all falls together. It's a lot more systems, circuit breakers, that kind of stuff. But the aircraft physically flies the same, as far as, if you move your hand left and right, it does the same stuff.
That's what I tell people about flying. You pull back, things get smaller. You push forward, they get bigger. Left and right is still the same.
Yeah.
Slightly more complicated than that, but it's a broad strokes of it.
No, I had, and I mentioned it in the book as well, that I was flying a V-22 simulator one time.
Which is the Osprey.
The tilt rotor, right? Yep. And at the time, the cockpit was the exact same as the MH-47 Echo, which was originally designed by IBM, right, and then taken over by Lockheed Martin. So all of the multifunction displays, all the the TV screens up front,
your PFD, your MFD, they're all
everything
the same.
was exactly the same, and even we'll call it the transmission page, looked the same, except that the V-22 had the nacelles would tilt, but it was same kind of thing, same page flow.
That aircraft had a rough transition into service.
And it still does. It's, my opinion, it's a technology demonstrator more than anything else.
2010, one of the first things that had happened when we got on the ground was a massive body recovery of a Osprey, I believe, and this is probably 15th hand by the time it got to me. And I don't even actually know if this is possible, but essentially they said one engine threw itself into, they countered each other in some way, and then which immediately flipped the aircraft over.
I think that just happened recently.
Yeah,
in the last 6 months.
Probably not recoverable for the pilots when that happens. No. I'd imagine, altitude dependent. Mm-hmm. So they fly. That's interesting. It's because they certainly don't look the same on the outside.
Yeah, but everything was the same as far as, in this case the instrumentation was the same, but the cyclic stick between your legs does the same thing. Go left, it goes left. Go right, it goes right. The power.
How does it start? Do you because either left or right seat could be the pilot in command. Or the aircraft commander, right?
Right.
How do you guys load share up there? And how do you decide who's flying what?
It's different in every airframe. Like the Black Hawk guys tend to get in and divide up the duties. All right, you get the left side, I'll get the right side, kind of thing, and they just go through it. And it works for them. In the Chinook community, it was a very specific, you had a checklist like the size of this thing.
Yep.
And you'd flip through it and be like, all right, battery switch on, on. And you would repeat call engine.
So very positive control with the verbiage back and forth.
Yes. And that's kind of it. And the Hueys, like I flew UH-72 Lakotas at West Point was my last assignment, and that's a single pilot aircraft. We typically flew 2 people, but if you were in there by yourself, you just kind of whip through it. But if you were with somebody, they would do the same thing. They'd read the checklist. So
in flight, is one person doing drastically more than the other? Basically they're flying it and the other person's just monitoring?
Yep, pretty much. So whoever's flying, which is interesting. You'd think the flying would be the fun part on missions, and it really isn't. It's the mission management, running the computers and, navigating and making sure you get there on time. And
really?
Yeah. So as guys get more senior, they want to sit in the seat where they get the map. And the other guy.
Who's usually flying? The guy on the right or the left?
Usually the guy on the right.
Okay.
Unless the guy the guy on the left is usually the pilot in command, because you get a better view and you get some different controls over it. Not controls, but different switches.
Okay.
And you get used to it, and then you like it. Like we do air refueling off a MC-130, right? And there's a big refueling probe sticks off the front of the aircraft, and the guy in the right seat is looking right down the probe, and he has all the advantage in the world, which kind of adds more stress, because how can you fuck that up, right? It's like, dude, it's just right there.
Probably several ways, I imagine.
Right, there is. But the idea is that if you're in the left seat, you have the out of going, the
angle was off, man. I couldn't really see
I'm
it
in
through
the left
windshield.
seat, right? Come on, this is hard. But, I did all my plugs for the left seat for the most part, and I was better in the left than the right. And then I always felt more pressure if I was in the right seat. And it's like, damn, I can't screw this up.
How much armament do you guys have up there?
So the MH-47 Golf, which is the current configuration, we had 2 Dillon 134 machine guns, right? Electric Gatling guns.
Yep.
Like 6 barrels. They shoot. I think the Dillons were straight 4,000 rounds a minute. And then you had, before that, we had GE version, which was an AC powered gun. And they were like muskets. You know what I mean? You know, engaging, right gun, pop! Right gun jam. So they would have to clear it. And that had a low and a high rate. You know, it was like 2,000 and 6,000 or something. I mean,
it is kind of awesome to hear them switching back and forth between the two.
Yeah. When it works.
Yeah.
But, you know, the other thing is the current ones run on batteries. When I was shot down in Anaconda, you know, RPG ripped through the aircraft, took out all the electricity.
Yeah, those guns are done.
No guns, you know. And
but I guess I phrased that improperly. How much armor do you have surrounding you in the cockpit?
Oh, armor?
Yeah.
It's not that much. I mean, you're sitting in a armored seat. You know, it's Kevlar.
Kevlar wrapped?
Yeah, it's just kind of old, like a chicken plate.
Okay.
You know, so it's about 1.5 inches thick. You know, you're sitting on that, and there's one in the back plate. And then you're wearing soft body armor with a plate up front that's very similar to what you're sitting on. It's very bulky. The ground force assaulters used to make fun of us because I'd be in the back during a logger site, and they're wearing this nice thin, you know, paper thin body
Gucci
armor. It's
gear.
like, this is great, and they'd go, "Look at you, you know, you could barely move." It's like, you know, whatever. The stuff they shoot at me is bigger than what they shoot at you, typically.
That's fair.
You know, I mean, they do. They shoot, you know, 14.5 and stuff like that. Although that doesn't mean you don't get it too, but yeah. And the plate's so small, it never really covers anything vital.
So minimal armor for the people up there flying the aircraft.
Yeah, and in the early days, we took all of the rest of the armor out. So
for weight management?
Weight, yeah. In order to fly where we flew, you know, up around 20,000 feet, you know, getting across the Hindu Kush, you couldn't have the armor. And then General Brown, who was the SOCOM commander at the time, at some point, maybe in 2002 or 3, he put out an edict: you will install the armor in the aircraft, and we did it, you know, grudgingly, but because not a single piece of armor, I believe, even in Anaconda, I don't think any aircraft armor was hit.
Really?
Body armor was, but
not the aircraft
not
armor
the aircraft
itself. So you graduate flight school. You're in a Chinook, begrudgingly.
Yeah.
And Desert Storm kicks off. So where does your career take you from there?
Oh, it jump starts it. You know, we go. So I'm in the 2nd and 159th. The headquarters is out of Bragg, and we're out of Savannah, and we fly up to Wilmington, North Carolina, to put the aircraft. They're gonna, you know, take the blades off, shrink wrap them, put them on top of a boat. Right? There's no high speed sea lift capability back then. So this is some old, you know, slow, you know, 5 knots, you know, trawler. So they send it over. We fly over a couple of weeks later to the port of Dammam, which is where the ship came in, and we had to unload the aircraft, build them up, and fly them to King Fahd Airport, which is where the 101st was building up. So we thought it was overkill, you know, sending 18 aircraft, 18 Chinooks is a lot of lift. And
what was your mission going to be?
We didn't know, because it was Desert Shield, right, which was a defensive operation to keep Saddam from invading Saudi Arabia. So there really wasn't anything. So what we did was we would supply troops in the field, particularly with big and heavy stuff, you know, tank transmissions, tank tracks, you know, that kind of stuff.
Just sling loading them out there?
We actually did a thing. You could do that, but the problem is the dust. The dust was so fine that even in the daylight, you couldn't see out the window. So you had to look straight down through the chin bubble, and some guys couldn't do that. So they put everything inside on a special system called Hicks. It's like those Air Force 463L pallets, the big aluminum pallets.
Yep.
Those slid in on a rail, and as long as it fit in the aircraft, you could take it. You know, and for the most part, there's not much you can put inside a Chinook that, you know, will limit it at sea level.
I mean, I have taken some of the best naps of my life inside of Toyota Hiluxes, facing out at the ramp in the passenger seat.
Right.
When the crew chief clearly told me not to be in the vehicle, and I'm like, yeah, no problem.
The crew chiefs hate that. You know, there was, I don't know how much.
But I just recline my seat, just.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about this, and there's nothing you're gonna do, you know. And if you're in the aircraft,
hey man, we're all fucking dead if we're going down.
Right. And you know, the crew chiefs, bless their hearts, you know, they're awesome, but boy, sometimes, you know, they can get really territorial about the aircraft. You know, I've had guys from your East Coast unit on the ramp. They've got their little tether.
Screamer.
They got their tether put to the floor.
Yeah, so for people listening, oftentimes, especially if you're going to do helo ops, I called it a screamer. And it's basically, it's girth hitched into your belt, and it's a carabiner that has some extension. Really good to have on little birds as well, in case they decide to rotate quickly.
Yeah.
But you're clipped in.
Yeah.
Some people are more comfortable with said clip than others.
Right. And
It's not the harness system that the crew chief is wearing, for sure.
no, that's for sure.
It's not a 5-point
But
harness.
I've had team leaders say, "Look, I got to be on the ramp as we come in. I can look." All right, I did everything I could to what we call the customers, right?
Yeah.
The supported unit, and the crew chiefs every flight would say, "Sir, they're on the ramp. They're not supposed to be on the ramp." Like, I know, but he really wants to be there. He's clipped in front of the hinge, So
Yeah.
because the ramp could technically free fall,
Buckle, yeah, if you lose hydraulics.
right? And they weren't wrong, but I was like, all right, and there was one organization used to wear tomahawks,
Yeah.
right, on their belt, and one guy got stuck. The ramp came up, and his tomahawk got stuck in between the ramp and the thing, and he couldn't move, and he couldn't reach the ICS button, and he just was
That's
stuck.
what you get for wearing a ridiculous item with you. Get what you pay for. Yeah, the crew chiefs would clearly be unhappy with us in the vehicle,
Yeah.
but they didn't push it.
No, because then they got to get you back. They know you can't get out of that thing.
And,
It's
eventually, we had worked with them enough, and they would see me open the door, and they're just like, "You motherfucker," but they wouldn't say anything.
tough. Yeah, no, some are better than others.
It was a better ride. It was a little quieter in there. Roll the windows up.
Yeah.
I mean, looking out the ramp, I'm like,
Oh, especially in the winter,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because the doors are open,
Yeah.
because the guns are out. It's freezing in there.
yeah, I'm not joking. Recline the seat a little bit. Some of the best naps of my life.
Yeah, as long as you don't start it up to get the heater going.
Of course.
We used to do missions out in Colorado with the 10th group, and they would put snowmobiles in the back. And, about 10 minutes out, they'd rev them up so they'd be all nice and warm.
No.
Oh, right. So you get wow.
Yeah,
I'm getting
carbon
sick.
monoxide
Right.
poisoning.
But so what we would do, and this is in the winter, mind you, at 12,000 feet, we'd the doors are open, and you'd do smoke and fume elimination. So you'd fly out of trim, and the wind would come through the pilot's window and the door gunner's window and blow out the ramp, and it really works. But it's cold.
Yeah.
It's like, guys, do you really?
So you're just slipping through the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the air comes through there like hard and fast, and it does evacuate it. But man, it's cold.
Yeah, I bet. All right, back to Desert Shields. What'd you guys end up doing? You were sling loading, or not sling loading, you were taking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you out there for?
I want to say 6 months or so.
Wow.
I mean, we were there in the very beginning. So I don't know, was it September, October, and we left in March. So, and we did things. What was interesting is, the Army at the time said, we own the night, right? Night vision goggles and all that stuff. But that wasn't true, because at the time you didn't have to be night vision qualified to fly. You just couldn't fly with goggles, so you'd fly unaided.
That sounds horrendous in the desert.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
For a guy like,
For you, yeah. You, I mean, you probably have
But
thousands
these-
of hours on tubes.
I have like 4,500
Yeah.
just on goggles. And these guys, they had 7,000, 8,000 hours total.
Yeah.
And a lot of it at night, even tactical night in
Holy shit.
Vietnam, they were scared of goggles. And so they'd, hey, take the Woj. So I got to fly a lot at night because, they'd stick me in with an instructor pilot, and the old guys would just wave you goodbye and welcome you back. And that's just the way it was. When President Bush, not President Bush, it was President Bush. So he came over, and it was the Vice President, Quayle. We were hauling around him and his entourage with Secret Service. And we actually did it at night, unaided, because the guy I was flying with wasn't qualified in goggles. So even though I was, he wasn't. So you have to have two up front. The whole crew has to be.
Would have loved to
qualified.
have seen the risk assessment paperwork on that.
Oh, they thought it was less risky.
It's-
That's where we came. So when it came time to do the actual invasion, we did this thing, Objective Cobra, which was this famous left hook that Schwarzkopf's guys came up with. And there was like 125 Chinooks, I think, if I get my math right, doing this thing in flights of 5. And you just go up, we had 5-10 minute separation, and it was all done in the daylight. And it was chaos. Once you cross the release point into Objective Cobra, there was, Chinooks, Blackhawks.
That sounds
Hueys.
like a nightmare.
It was crazy. And if we had done that at night, it would have been catastrophe. guaranteed.
So when they're doing formation flying at night without the aid of goggles, did they have overt lights on the aircraft?
They're called slime lights. They're like a sort of a green. You've seen them on C-17s, probably.
Yeah.
It's just a green light, and you keep them lined up a certain way, and it keeps you in position.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's a hard pass.
Yeah, I was. It's funny because I taught night vision at Fort Rucker after a couple of years after that, and I had some guys that were Vietnam pilots in the Guard, and they had to come through the Chinook transition to get the new Chinooks, and they had to get goggle qualified, and I never had one. They all came in, with their heels dug in. I'm not doing it, and they all leave going, "This is great. Oh my God, if we'd only had these in Vietnam,
If only I could turn the night into a pseudo day, and see way better than my enemy could. Hopefully, yeah. So, how was the rest of the invasion when you guys went back?
So we, it was quick, 100-hour war, right? And I remember it. I hate to say it this way, but I was disappointed, because things were going really well for us.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And I was a young guy, and I still remember the radio call over guard. It's a frequency everybody has to listen to, and like ceasefire, stop all offensive operations. The war's over. Like, wow, pretty wild. And so we ended up flying around in Iraq, picking up prisoners of war, and flying them back to Saudi Arabia to be processed. And on one particular night, an aircraft flying with no night vision goggles flew into an unlit antenna along this road we called the Tap Line. And it killed everybody but the door gunner, who was an infantryman. And that's something that later on in life, when I got shot down in Anaconda, I had an opportunity to call my wife, with the agency guys had a phone.
Yeah.
And I elected not to do it because when this other event happened in Desert Storm, people called home that had access to phones, and the notification process did not go properly, and everybody knew who it was.
I've been involved in that one time where the news outpaced the military's ability to get a hold of the proper personnel, and by the time the individual was notified, probably hadn't been directly communicated with, but enough information had gotten out, and they had kind of done some deductive reasoning and math and realized, everybody else has heard from somebody, but it was the absolute worst.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so that was really the end of our rotation, and we came back. I was so now the Army had realized, we don't own the night, but now we will, right? So they start doing these big exercises. Everything at the Joint Readiness Training Center, JRTC, and the National Training Center, NTC, out in California, everything now is done at night. All the big exercises in between, same thing. And because I was one of the few, out of 16 air crews, there were only 6 of us goggle qualified and current. So I got to go on everything. I became a pilot in command, and then I was, in much higher demand than, any of the other guys, because I could fly when they couldn't. And then I got sucked into an unaccompanied tour in Korea, which was actually, other than being separated from my family, it was very, it was key to my career progression, because I became a unit trainer, not an instructor pilot. It's like a stair step below. And I would fly the border back and forth between North and South Korea and teach guys what to look for as far as key landmarks, so that if you were to fly north of the buffer zone into the border area, you would recognize key landmarks and know, I'm not supposed to be here. And you would turn a certain heading and make a radio call and just haul ass and try to get out of there. And just after I left, there was an OH-58 crew that was doing that, and they did penetrate the border, and they got shot down. One of the pilots was killed. The other one was, paraded around on TV for a little while before they let him go. So that training had a lot of value, and it was definitely, I wouldn't say high stress, but it was meaningful. If you screwed it up, it meant something, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I liked. It fed me. And out of that, I got to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama as an instructor pilot. So I did that. And I was still too young. I was a young CW2, right? So there's 5 warrant officer ranks, 1 through 5. and I was a 2, which is junior. I don't even have star on my wings yet, right? So you have, aviator wings, senior wings, and master wings in the Army.
Is that based off of flight hours or rank?
For warrant officers, it's based on flight hours and time in service. For regular officers, captains, majors, it's I think it's just time in service.
Okay.
So that's the difference you see there. So even now, if you were to see a W1 for some reason and he had a star on his wings, he's a very senior guy, and he's about to, as far as W1s go, and he's about to get promoted, kind of thing. Otherwise, he's just a junior guy with no experience. But so I get there, and my first 2 sets of students were a blast. And they just were fun to deal with, and it was fun teaching them because they were essentially peers. They were also young CW2s. And then I got some very senior guard pilots in Alabama, and they had CH-54 sky cranes as an airframe. And the Army turned those in. They were finally at the end of their service life, and they gave them Chinooks. Well, these guys didn't like doing that. They bitched at it the whole time as if it were my fault, right? So they were miserable to teach, and they didn't want to learn from me because, quite frankly, when you're talking like aeromedical stuff and aerodynamics, they knew all that. I knew the systems, but they could learn it just as quick as I could teach it if they wanted to, but they didn't want to, so it was no fun. And after like 3 sets of students like that, I got foreign students, and the problem with the foreign students is they're all really good. So we had the Aussies and the Singaporeans and the Dutch, and every one of them has aerospace degrees, and so you can't teach them aerodynamics because they know it, right?
They're actually probably polishing you up a little bit.
And
on
they were
aerodynamics.
Yes, and they're super nice, but I'm not teaching them anything, so it's no fun. And a friend of mine who I went to the instructor pilot course came through for another course, and he's like, "Al, you need to come up to the 160th." And I was like, I don't know, guys way better than me have been turned away, but what you don't know is why they get turned away, right? Guys come back, those assholes, they wouldn't take me, whatever, some bullshit reason.
Well, I was going to ask you, so you hadn't even applied to the 160th yet. How were they talked about internally inside of the Army aviation community?
Well, there's 2 schools of thought, and there still are, right? One school of thought is there are a bunch of cowboys doing crazy, insane things, and who would want to do that? They're unsafe, right? Oh my God, look what they do. And the other school of thought is, they are the best that we have to offer. And that's what I thought of them, and I didn't think I was good enough to get in. And I did have some friends that assessed and were not accepted, and I considered them better pilots than me, maybe even better men, and they were turned away. And, years later you find out, they had bad finances, or, they were in a divorce that you didn't know about. So you never know, and I was doing those assessments, as an instructor in the 160th, and I could see, it's like, everybody's going to think this guy's a shoo-in, but we're not going to take him, for whatever reason.
Yeah, you got to have the complete picture.
Yeah.
So at some point, though, you must have decided to put your paperwork in.
Yeah. So computers were still relatively new as far as like laptops, right? So I was like one of the only guy in the company that had a laptop, and so I had this application, and I decided not to use the laptop. I was going to fill it out by hand, right?
Old school.
Yeah, and it was like, 1/4 inch thick, about 2-sided, and lots of little print. And so I filled it out, and when I didn't do it all in one sitting, I did it over the course of about 3 or 4 months. And when there was no empty blocks, I submitted it. And like a week later, I got a call from the recruiter. He's like, "Hey, you want to come up and assess?" I was like, "Me? Sure." Right? So I go up there, and my chain of command was not happy because I'd only been there about a year. Like, "You got to be here 2-3 years, to get our money's worth out of you." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." They're telling me it'll be 2 years before I leave. They're like, "All right, you can go." Right? So I go up there and I assess. It's a week-long assessment.
What do they have you do? I'm assuming it's flying based.
No, there is flying involved, but you start out with a regular Army physical fitness test. They add some stress to it. They don't count out loud, so you don't know if you're passing or not. Yeah. Then they take you immediately to the pool, and you jump in with your flight gear on, and you swim, like breaststroke, side stroke, backstroke, tread water with just your feet for 15 minutes, just your hands for 15 minutes, then regular for like 5, and then you go swim underwater a undisclosed distance in your gear. And by the time you do that, unless you're a Navy SEAL, you're tired. And,
Even SEALs get tired too.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's a big secret.
Yeah. Well,
they're ordinary people.
right. But the pool, I've seen some guys do some really neat stuff. But I jump in and I'm swimming and I'm like, I can't go any further. And I come up and I'm like, all right, get out of the pool, sir. I'm walking around and the recruiter walks up with a clipboard and he's like, hey, Mr. Mack, did you get to go twice? I was like, no. Twice? And he's like, yeah, get in line. So he didn't say I didn't do it. He just said do it twice. I'm like, oh man, I didn't go far enough. And I'm like, there's no way I can go any further. So I jumped in and I'm swimming. Now I'm swimming harder than I did the first time. And I decided I was just going to black out. I'm like, they won't let me die. They'll just, they'll pull me out. And all of a sudden I get tapped on the helmet. I swam the length of the pool. I was like, wow. And why didn't you do that the first time? I don't know.
Yeah. Because I was fucking tired.
Yeah. But I did it. And then so you come out of that, and the next day you do, or maybe even that day, you do two psychology tests. They're like 600 questions and 300 questions. And then the next day you go to the shrink, and he analyzes your results, right? And then you take a general aviation knowledge test, which includes aerodynamics, aeromedical, threat systems. And the thing with threat systems is you don't really memorize all of them. You memorize the ones that you're likely to encounter, or maybe a theater of war that you're going to, right? It's like, all right, they have nothing but SA-6s and manpads. All right, that's what you'll brush up on. But they're giving you all this stuff from the full arsenal of, the Soviet Union. And there's no way to pass that unless you're like a super geek, and they'll use that against you later on. Then they give you your navigation target, which in Fort Campbell, Kentucky is a grass unlit strip. And Kentucky is super flat. There's nothing to navigate off of unless you're used to it. Once you get up there, you can see the creeks and things like that. And the maps are kind of out of date, so railroad tracks that you're looking for aren't there. You can't parallel roads, handrail them, that kind of stuff. So they make it tough on you. But it's stuff that once you're a Night Stalker, that's the norm anyway. But when you come from out in the big army, it isn't necessarily...
It's not a traditional mission set.
Right. And then so you go out, you brief your mission, you go fly it with just a clock and a compass, and they may throw a mission change at you. There is no way to pass the flight. There's none.
Yes.
And I know that from being the guy doing it.
Yeah.
And you could be a super stud, and they'll just do something like fly out of trim and slow you down, or come off heading a little bit while they're asking you questions, and you end up, ultimately the guy in the right seat who's navigating is turning the map ever so slowly like a bus driver, right? And that's when he's done. And it's like, where are we? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go home. And then you use that against them, in the it's like a job interview board. You're sitting in front of a panel of officers who ask you why you didn't do this or that, or what you would do in certain circumstances. And the goal is to push you to your emotional limit and see, can you take it, right? Because you know what the community is like. I mean, we dig at each other. If you can't take it, you don't belong. That's the personality. And I've seen men cry, lose their temper. I've seen captains in particular get up, veins sticking out of their face. And, I'm out of here. It's like, okay, well, we didn't want you anyway.
Bon voyage.
I mean, there's a reason. And usually it's the colonel that'll do that to them. Like the warrant officers won't push somebody like that, but the colonel, the major, they'll do that.
Chip away at them.
Yeah. And that's kind of it, and they either accept you or they don't.
Do they tell you at the end of the assessment?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the varsity move would be send you home and don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah.
Let them stew for about 14 days.
Yeah, that would suck.
That's
Guys might change their mind.
That's how it is for the East Coast Command. You do the whole week screening, or at least when I went through.
Yeah.
And they say, we'll be in touch.
They make you leave the room, about 20 minutes, and then they're in there, bullshitting and having fun.
Yeah.
You can't hear them, obviously. But they decide pretty quick. And one thing I did learn is if they know right away that they don't want you, they're usually pretty nice to you. They're not mean at all. They're just like, hey, don't want to take you, But boy, if they dig at you, it either means they hate you or they love you. But you don't know.
Yeah.
You can assume.
Until you walk back in, get the thumbs up or down.
Yeah. And it's nice when they accept you.
So how much time from when you get accepted until you actually show up? Because I would imagine your duty station was a little peeved.
They were not
you
happy.
owed some time.
They were not happy. The battalion commander had just changed out while I was up there. Like they did change of command. So he, my paperwork comes in, and now they asked me which battalion I wanted to be in.
At the 160th?
At the 160th. 3rd Battalion in Savannah, Georgia, where I actually owned a house, and Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The difference was at Savannah, they had the older MH-47 Deltas, which came from 2nd Battalion. They kind of hand-me-downs. Good aircraft, but the MH-47 Echo was brand new, and it was really sweet.
Choice is easy.
Yeah, so it was. And so I took that. But, the other thing that happened is the battalion commander, Colonel Schlosser, right, he ended up being, I think, a major general. He called me personally and said, hey, what questions do you have, about deployments? And at the time, there's no war, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, we're talking JRTC.
Yeah, what year was this?
95.
Okay.
Right, or 94 into 95. I got there late 95. And when I talked to the 3rd Battalion guys, they wouldn't tell me anything. They were like, zip lip. They were like,
that makes the decision pretty easy.
Yeah, I was like, all right, here's the colonel calling me personally, saying, here's the deal. He gave me some stories about the Haiti invasion, where a guy's wife was going to have a baby during the the time frame they were deployed, and he called the wife and said, look, I need your husband. I'll give him back as soon as I don't. And he meant that. As soon as they didn't need him, they sent him home, and he actually made the birth.
That's awesome.
So I was like, all right, I'm going there. But they also told me it'd be about a year, except the problem is the pipeline from when you get to Campbell for Green Platoon, right? It's the train up platoon. Do your basic combat skills, hand-to-hand, shooting, that kind of stuff. And then you move into basic nav for the officers, and the enlisted guys go into, log PT and, all that kind of stuff. And then you start doing your navigation routes. And you do that, then you go into your airframe specific, Black Hawk, Chinook, whatever. And it takes 8 months to a year, and then when you get to the company, it's another 6 to 8 months before you're usable.
Up to speed, yeah.
So
damn, that's about 18 months.
Yeah. So they were like, we need you now. So they pulled some strings that they do with the HRC, the Department of the Army, and up I went. But boy, my battalion commander was so mad that he decided to adjust his officer evaluation support form. They have this like a fit rep in the Navy, right? And so you get blocked. You're either center mass, above mass, below mass, like that, of your peers. And he put me center mass, and at the time, he was over on those, which meant I was actually below center mass. It was a bad OER. And he basically would have screwed I would never got promoted with that thing. But they wouldn't take it back. So what they did is they did some paperwork stuff where he changed his profile, which made it just an average one. And then the 160th, the battalion commander up there wrote me like 2 OERs quickly in a row with above center mass to kind of fix things.
Rounded it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it worked out good because I got promoted below the zone several, all the way up to W5.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're there, you're going through the, what you call it, Green Platoon?
Green Platoon, yeah.
You get all your stuff up and running, you finally get to your squadron. And I mean, what did life look like there pre 9/11? What were you guys up to? Other than probably flying your asses off.
Yeah, we were. I mean, the cool thing with the 160th is you train in the environment, right, with your supported units. So we
trained with you guys all the time.
Yeah. So we'd go out to Colorado, fly in the mountains. We go to San Diego, do GoPlats or VBSS, assaulting ships with fast rope. We did this on the East Coast. We were always on naval vessels, doing our practice landings and all that. And then we were always up, using supplemental oxygen. We shot a lot of live fire stuff, with the A-10s, doing personnel recovery. So it was a lot of fun, and we always stayed in nice places, usually hotels or something like that. We didn't have any tents, which by Army standards is a step up in the lodging.
Luxury.
Right. And so it was great. You were gone a lot. The companies were divided up. I can't really discuss how, other than to say that one worked with, we'll call it black soft, and the other was white soft.
Yep.
Because The Army took away all of the special forces groups had their own flight detachment at the time, and they took all of their helicopters away and created 3rd Battalion of the 160th, right? So the fact that money comes from, we'll just say different colors, black or white.
Yep.
We promised to give them a certain amount of aircraft for the White Soft side because there's way more proportionally. So the company I was in was dedicated to White Soft support, SEAL Team 1 and 3 and 2 and that kind of stuff, SF groups. Rangers were kind of would flux between the two. And the interesting thing for us is it allowed junior pilots to take senior pilot responsibilities. And in other words, you could screw up something and the guys might get mad at you, but it wasn't like a black eye against the unit. Whereas the one other company that worked with the other fellas, it always had to be the senior guy, the best guy had to do the controls because, and the problem with that is the junior guys never really got good until they got to be senior guys, and then they weren't really any good until they got good. You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a gap there.
Yeah. And that gap showed up in 2001. There was, TF Sword and Dagger, right? Dagger was up north and Sword was on a ship down in south of Afghanistan. And their customers came up and worked with us out of Bagram, right? And they didn't know us at all. There was none of that habitual relationship or any of that stuff. But they knew who we were. We had the same aircraft, same equipment. We're at Bagram. I got a beard, and like, who the hell is this guy with a beard? I've never met him before. Give me the bearded guy, kind of thing. And that. What was it? We were down in Tora Bora, and we're landing the guys from Bragg in there. And after a couple of after-action reviews, they're like, "How come you guys don't crash every time you land in the dust?" Right?
Not our first rodeo.
My buddies in the other company are going to be mad about this, but the difference is we had been to Kuwait 2 years in a row for Desert Thunder, Desert Fox, which were, we were there for like 7 months a pop, flying every night, trying some new techniques with landing. There's some little video game toys in the aircraft that kind of help you land in the dust without being able to see.
Brownouts are real. Yeah,
and we were landing brownout. The guys in Sword, they had pre-assault fires, which kind of blinded them a little bit. A lot of dust sitting in the valley where Omar's compound was, Objective Gecko, and they damaged a lot of aircraft, right? Because they just didn't anticipate that. Which really, years later, I was doing something with General McChrystal, and he sat down with me. He said, "What do you think about this?" I'm like, "Sir, I've never ever landed amongst 2,000 pounders going off. I have no idea what the smoke and the fire." And he goes, "Well, let's rehearse it." So we didn't use 2,000 pounders, but they were like 500 pounders. But we got to kind of experience what we would see. So you kind of adjusted the, maybe the path in, so you're looking a certain way or whatever. But
smart.
But that was the difference between the two companies, and eventually that all washed out. Really, by the end of 2002, you couldn't tell the difference.
Well, the operational cycle just became insane.
Yeah.
So prior to 2001, obviously September 11th, which is crazy. We're coming up on 21st anniversary of it this year. If my math is correct. I'd have to Glover check me. Would you say in your military aviation career, had you considered yourself to have been exposed to combat operations at that time?
Not really.
I mean maybe technically by the letter of the law, but I would imagine that surging over to K2 in Uzbekistan was probably a little bit of a different feeling.
Oh yeah, it was Desert Storm was quick, and it was we were just generally logistics people, carrying supplies in and out people. So our first mission in Uzbekistan was personnel recovery. And, the interesting thing with that is that 9/11 happens. I'm down at JRTC, right, in Louisiana. We drive up to Fort Campbell because nothing is flying. And we finally get up there, and we now have our secure means of finding out what's going on. And then I get sent down with a team of planners to Tampa to start planning personnel recovery for a bombing operation. And nobody tells us about the unconventional warfare that's being planned, which is the 5th group, because they're in isolation, which is a Cold War model.
Yeah.
And they could have, turns out I was one wall away. They could have just,
oh no shit, come
over and said, "Hey, can you do this with a helicopter in this terrain?" And I could have said no, or yes, whatever.
Yeah.
But so we're we're over there working for the Air Force, doing personnel recovery. And as soon as we had the first two Chinooks built up, they started bombing. And
built up mean they're in K2 and ready to fly.
Right. So the aircraft come over on C-17s. Took 21 C-17s because at the time we used C-5s, much bigger airplane.
Yeah.
You put two Chinooks on it plus all the support equipment to build it up. So one C-5 could get somewhere and you could build up a team.
Yeah, net you two birds.
Yeah, C-17 was like 3 aircraft to do the same as one.
That sucks.
Yeah, because each aircraft would have one Chinook, and then you'd have the build-up equipment.
Yeah.
Now since then, and it was only because the ground support equipment that holds the rotors and the transmissions were set for C-5s, and now it's all, you can't still do it with one aircraft, but you can do it with 2 instead of 3. But as soon as we rolled them off and built them up, it takes a couple hours. It's quicker than you might think. And as soon as the National Command Authority knew that we were ready, they were like, go. And so, that campaign goes on for a little bit. And then 5th Group rolls in. They change responsibility. So Colonel Mulholland takes over from Colonel Kisner. And he wants a meeting, with the 2 MH-47 flight leads, is me and a guy. I'm going to call him Arlo. And we come in and we're like, you want us to do what? You want to fly across these mountains with, a 12-man team with fully equipped with supplies? Can't be done. And he said, why not?
Because you'll fly into the side of the mountain.
Well, there's that, right? And if not that, the Taliban had all of the key low terrain. Anywhere we wanted to go through the mountains, they were, with some very deadly air defense equipment. So we had to do what we could, is to go over the top. And so that's why we were up around, 15, 20,000 feet. Especially the guys, if you went to the Panjshir Valley, you had to go over about 21,000 feet. If you went further to the middle of the country, like Mazar-i-Sharif, it was more like 12, maybe 14,000, which was like nothing compared to the 20,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
how were those first flights into Afghanistan?
The easiest way to put it is that we used equipment that was only ever used in theory, like in the simulator. We never used it for real, the terrain following radar in particular. And I actually flew in single ship. So there was, nowadays you go on target, there's a stack overhead, right? SATCOM at the time was intermittent because we had a low angle bird, right, in the mountains. And, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so the other team, we're separated in 2 teams, silver and gold. And gold being the Golden Children, right, the commander and his guys, took one of my helicopters and flew off to the Panjshir, and I got the horse soldiers for General Dostum, single ship. And what they did to compensate that was to give me the DAPs. Well, here, we'll give you DAPs. Right?
Yeah, but they can't go as high
or
as far.
Right. And they would go as far, like the bombers in World War II, the fighter cover would go as far as it could and then wait for you to come back out. And they made the best time of it. If they knew that, I'd leave the DAPs behind and they'd troll back and forth along my course trying to draw fire, and then they'd attack. Like, all right, well, fine. Yeah. We'll find something to do. And
yes, they will.
But in this case, we ran into a sandstorm, and what we didn't know as the air crew was that Donald Rumsfeld had called down personally to the command and said, you get those teams in tonight, because we'd had 2 aborts for weather. And he said, you get both teams in tonight, 555, triple nickel, and 595, the horse soldiers. So I've got 595, and off we go. We run into a sandstorm, and the DAPs has got, balls this big because they sucked right in. And the only thing they could do is they could see when you increase power, a turbine engine gets hotter. Right?
Yeah.
And when you take it out, it gets colder, right? So you see the plume of glow in your night vision goggles. And they sucked in close enough they could only see the engines. They couldn't see my airframe, right? Because normally you can see the airframe pitch up and down and you match it, right? All they could see was engines are getting hotter, he's climbing. And they would climb.
Oh, they're out of their fucking minds.
And you can only go so far before, they just, they called Uncle and they turned around. So now I'm by myself. I've got the radar on, and I got the battalion commander in my jump seat, which is a little seat just behind me between the pilots. And he's like, Al, what do you think? And I said, sir, we'll just TF. And he's like, okay, do it. I'm like, holy crap. I didn't think he'd say that. I was like, all right, Jason, go, right? So we head off on the queue, and because we didn't plan to use the radar, there's some considerations, which it's math problems, but we turned and faced a mountain that was about 13,000 feet high, and the radar the aircraft didn't have the capability to get over it. But we didn't plan on flying over it. We were going to go around it, but the radar doesn't know that, right? So it gives you this thing called a full climb command, and you have to climb because the aircraft doesn't have performance. And you slow down, you climb as fast as you can, like your life depends on it, because it does. And you got to figure something out. So I'm scrolling through the maps on the multifunction display, trying to find what am I commanding off of. And I was like, there's a mountain right there. I'm like, turn right, 20 degrees. And as soon as we did, it was out of the command corridor. The aircraft came down. We went past it and did it. So then for the rest of the time in Afghanistan and anywhere in the world, they plan every mission as if you'll use that piece of equipment.
Smart.
Yeah. It does limit you a little bit, though.
Yeah.
People will say, well, why can't you do this? Why can't you go faster? Well, because we're planning on using the radar just in case.
Yeah.
So if the weather's not good, we can deal with that.
Uneventful after that, though, as far as getting the horse soldiers in?
Yeah. Other than, so we had to cross this final ridge line, and there was a Taliban anti-aircraft piece right next to the landing zone. And we were shielded by a small hill, a little knoll, and it was a 23 millimeter. I think it was a ZPU 23-2. And they warned me about it. And that thing's, 23 millimeter round is gigantic, right?
Yeah.
And that would just shred my aircraft. So we're coming across, and we lower the terrain, what we call clearance altitude. The aircraft descends a little bit. We're trying to pop out of the clouds. And then right below us is the landing zone, except we've got like 2,000 feet to lose, but only about a quarter mile, maybe a mile to lose it.
Steep descent angle.
Right. And when you do that, you really can't see what, So my co-pilot, I'm like, do S turns. And he's like, what's S turns? I'm like,
turns that look like an S.
I have controls, right?
Yeah.
I caught him by surprise. And so I'm doing these S turns. I mean, just like you would do in a parachute, right?
Yeah.
Coming down. And when we get to the bottom, we're at a point where now we should face the landing zone and land, except I'm in the left seat, it's out the right, and I can't see it. I'm like, have you got the landing zone? He goes, yes. I go, you have the controls. And we're like maybe 100 feet off the ground, and he takes the controls, and he's not ready for it. So as we're decelerating into the dust cloud, he transitions to the hover symbology. He says, I'm inside, right seat. And I'm like, all right. And now I can't see anything outside, and he's just on this little video game. And the crew chief can see looking straight down. So you're taking your pacing off of them. They're like, aft gears off 20, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. And about that time, the aircraft starts going backwards, or at least I feel like it is. And I called on abort. I was like, go around. And about that time, the ass end touches the ground. Not hard, just touches down. And I'm like, oh, we are not going around. So I shoved down on what we call the thrust, is the power lever. And he's fighting me. And this guy, so I just watched a video you did with Lavery. Yeah. Yeah. Well, my co-pilot looks like him.
That dude was huge.
Yeah. Well, that was my co-pilot.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's like trying to pull up, and I'm pushing down, and we both, there's no, the hydraulics are the same for both of us. So I could feel myself getting pushed up, and then he finally realizes what I'm doing, and he just lets the forward gear down, and we land, and we're there. And the dust dissipates, and we're surrounded by, Afghan fighters. Friendly, who knows, right? Because the agency guy had been there. The team that Mike Spann was on actually was there doing the prep work. So the team gets off, and all these guys with AKs are standing around, and I'm like, oh man, this isn't good, right? And then Mark Nooch, who's the commander of 595, kind of walks around to where I could see him. He gives me a thumbs up. I'm like, all right, we're out of here. So we just did reverse what we did, and when we got back, we were so depleted, like energy-wise, adrenaline, all that stuff, that we just sat in the aircraft, the crew, and just kind of
took a minute.
It was like, what the hell, And back then, the colonel would come out, and the chaplain, and everybody was like, "'Cause this is a big deal, right?"
Yeah.
And then after about 5 or 6 missions, nobody'd come out.
Yeah. See you when you get back.
Yeah. But we would, the other team had similar, things. Like they had to deal with the terrain. I had to deal with more like enemy situation, right? So I had man pads and AAA pieces. They had the mountains, the big mountains to deal with. And we got back, and the other flight lead and he had some bourbon that he got from agency pilot, a guy named Ned. A lot of people in the community actually know him. But he got us this bourbon, and we snuck off into a back room, had a little bourbon, and I was like, what do you think, man? And he goes, I don't know, man. What do you think? I said, I think we're not going to last 5 missions. We're going to die. And he's like, I agree.
Yeah.
And we really believe that. And it was interesting because I was talking to General Mulholland a couple of years later. We unveiled America's Response statue in New York City. It's a horse soldier down at Ground Zero. And he goes, hey, Chief, we never really got to talk about, some of this stuff. He goes, what were you thinking on those first missions? And I told him that. And he goes, well, you could have told me that. I was like, why?
Some things are better left unsaid.
It wasn't going to change.
Yeah.
We just didn't think we'd live. We were using the aircraft in a way it had never been used before, at its limit or beyond. And if we used it beyond its limits, you had to figure out, how you were going to deal with it. Like you get up in these mountains and fly along the military crest, you don't have enough power to maybe climb over and use it for cover. So you'd either have to learn to, cyclic climb, not using engine power, and get over, or just dive down the other side, which is funny because today I was up near Glacier National Park, and we were getting a pass for tomorrow, my wife and I. But I was going through it, and it's like, this kind of reminds me of Afghanistan a little bit. I mean, the mountains aren't as craggy, but, the same kind of thing. And I was thinking, yeah, this is something.
Complications for sure in those mountains.
Yeah.
So how long after that was Anaconda?
That was October 19th was our first mission. Anaconda was March 3rd and 4th. So, we had a lot of very interesting missions in between, Tora Bora. We had a C-130 crash in front of us while we were air refueling.
In air refueling C-130?
Yeah.
What took it down?
The mountain. They ran into a mountain.
Controlled flight into terrain?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. That's a whole, that's in book.
Yeah.
03, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was sort of a gray night, and the snow on the ground blended in with the gray, and we got off track because one of the aircraft was having trouble, and they held their altitude, and at the last, and they were all hypoxic, which was a thing. They were on station wishing away about 1,000 feet of altitude, and in other words, their altimeter setting was off.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to wear their supplemental oxygen because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
but at least take a hit off it from time to time.
Well, they were like, we're at 9,900 feet. We don't have to put it on, right? At 10,000, you're supposed to wear it.
Yeah.
And so they were hypoxic, and I can't remember that. Like by the time they got to the hospital, because I landed and picked them up. One of the best landings I ever did actually was landing on the side of that mountain and getting those guys. And actually,
they survived.
Everybody survived. They pancaked.
Oh.
And
I thought you meant like a sheer mountain.
Well, it was, but it had like a sort of a gentle thing, and then went up like this. So what they did is they saw the vertical, they pitched up, stalled, and slammed into the more slight slope.
Wow.
And a SEAL, you probably know him, he's a Medal of Honor recipient, was actually the team leader on my aircraft, so I landed and put him in.
Yep.
And so he walked up the hill and would send the guys back, and I watched them come down the hill, and we were still being tactical, and they were going to get cut in half. I mean, the rotor blades were inches off the ground if you didn't go out and around them.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out, I can't beep the horn. I'm trying to think of how to get to these guys, and it's hip deep snow. And there's 2 air refueling lights up on the forward pylon. One's infrared and one's white. So you could do unaided air refueling.
Yeah.
So I turn that on, and the guy stops. He knows right away. Now he can see the rotors. Then he comes around, and we rescued them all, pulled them off the hill. But that's probably the best landing I ever did, yeah. Because the snow was so deep and the slope, I just, pretty much what I did is I flew the aircraft into the side of the hill. The decel angle was exactly that of the slope.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But so anyway, we get all these things happen, and then we get the last mission we have to do is Operation Anaconda, which isn't even our mission, right? It's a 101st 82nd Airborne mission, and we're about to rip out, right? Relief in place. So our sister company is coming back to relieve us, and they're like, you know what? We're going to let you guys do this because you've been flying here this whole time, and then it got delayed for weather. And I don't know, 2 weeks or something like that. And then what they did, when I say they, I'm not sure who, alerted all the NGOs, so all the non-governmental organizations, Red Cross, Red Crescent, UN. Hey, there's a big operation coming. You might want to get out of here.
Well, those organizations are airtight. That information would never make it to parties that you wouldn't want it to get it to.
Right. So I don't know how the bad guys got there.
Yeah.
But so that's how we end up in Anaconda. So we do play a part. We have I think we had 7 Chinooks there at that time. Razors 1 through 7, and the 3rd Battalion was just arriving in Kandahar. They were building up as this was happening, and they had 6 or 7 aircraft. And the roles that we selected, Razor 1 and 2, were QRF, Quick Reaction Force, and so Razors, I was 3 and 4, and then the other ones were assigned the job of putting all the coalition special forces on top of the key terrain to call for fire, because the idea is we thought Zawahiri and bin Laden were there, which is why we were involved at all. Mm-hmm. And my 2 aircraft were the HVT takedown with the Mako element. Yep. And so if Zawahiri or bin Laden popped up, we were going to go get them. So we were essentially supposed to stay out of the fight unless they found them. So the other Razors all put in, the Germans, the Dutch, the French, the Canadians, put them in on all these mountains. And then the Afghan force with General Zia, with Chief Warrant Officer Harriman was the lead. Right? I can't remember which group he was with. And they would drive in the hammer and the anvil, right? So we placed the anvil, and the hammer is Zia's forces with, special forces assistance. Except there's a friendly fire incident, fratricide, right? The AC-130 destroys Harriman's vehicle while he's in the process of making this movement, and he's the main effort. So that Afghan force just runs, and they're like, if he gets killed, what's going to happen to us?
Yeah.
So that being said, the Taliban, Al Qaeda elements that were there were all dug in, and the 101st was getting their ass handed to them, right? Because all of their landing zones were, ranged in with mortars and stuff. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they decide, well, the big 2 aren't here, so let's use those SEALs and the HVT team, and we'll go put them up on Takagara, and they can call in fire key terrain, right? So it doesn't, the enemy doesn't know that we want that, but it's key to them, right? They get the same benefit.
Key terrain is key terrain.
Right.
Enemy or friendly.
All right. So we get the mission, we go down, and I didn't actually know a slab personally at that time. So he was the team leader that had been on the C-130 crash. I had pulled him out of a situation. They'd done a snatch, and I had to go pick him up, and that's a long story. But so he's talking crap on the SATCOM about us, right? So I'm sitting on the aircraft with the squadron commander, with his squadron commander, right?
Yeah.
And because he's like, because we knew the weather was coming in, and we told them, as in my commander said, do not do a snatch. We can't come get you. The weather's going to be horrific, right, in the mountains. So I'm out there. They're like, we need extract right now. That we took these guys, and they're coming after us, and they're going to be mad. So I'm out there now. The squadron commander is he's like, all right, I'm going to go with them, right? And we don't go. I'm sitting on the APU, auxiliary power unit, just waiting for the weather to clear, which I know will not clear. Everybody knows it's not going to clear, except Slab's on the other side of the weather in a beautiful valley, right? And him and John Chapman are calling back on the SAT, and they're like, tell those guys to get off their ass and come get us right now. And you hear whoever Shark Base or whatever the hell it was is like, yeah, Mako, the weather's bad. And he goes, might I remind you, the weather is beautiful here. This is Slab.
Yeah.
And he just
beautiful where you are.
Right. And to get to him, I mean, you got to fly through the mountains, and you got to use the terrain following radar, which I was okay with, but the other team had some close calls because the equipment, your phone, right? You ever had your phone lock up on you?
Yeah. And
you got to reset it. Well, the aircraft does that, right? And when
that's fun.
Yeah. So that's the whole bit with planning for it. But anyway, so they call up and they say, okay, look, you can go get them if you can stay out of the clouds, right? I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot, right? So I take off, I run down past Kabul, and I'm looking to the east or the west, and I'm trying to find a draw that'll take me up over the mountains, but just under the clouds. And I'm running up these draws, hitting dead ends, coming back out. It's much more dangerous than what I wanted to do. And the squadron commander's still sitting there. He's quiet. And Slab is still talking shit. Where are they? Why aren't they here yet? I've done the math. They should be here by now, right? And I'm quiet. And I'm just hoping my guys will be quiet. Because if the squadron commander hadn't been on board, we'd have been motherfucking him.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, come on, guys, be professional, right? And so it can't happen. I don't have enough gas now. I got to go back. And they're just raising hell on the radio. So I called back. I had to wait till I get within line of sight to use the FM radio to call my talk. And I was like, look, I can make it. It'll be 15 minutes in the clouds. Just let me do it. I'll get them. And they were quiet for a while. And they finally said, okay, get gas in the FARP, hot fuel. And we're going to bring out some sleeping bags. And you're going to stay in Kandahar. You're not coming back here. It's a closer run. All right, fine, deal. So we go out, we get them. I mean, literally, I activate the terrain following radar. We get there and, quick. We pick them up. Of course, they pick the hardest place to pick them up. It's
of course.
It's like Slab's like, all right, here's the deal. Come straight at me and put the nose right over my head, right? Which means that he's on the backside of this spur, and my nose is hanging out over a couple of 1,000-foot drop to get the forward landing gear on the ground so that they can climb in the side door. And Chalk 2 had to do the same thing. And we'd go running down to Kandahar and spent the night. And I remember thinking, oh, man, why did they have to do that? And they, the next night I got to fly them home. I'm thinking, they went back on a 130, and I guess they had their ass handed to them by their commander. And so we get back up there, and this was pretty embarrassing. I had to sit down and listen to an apology like I have never heard, right? And Slab and John Chapman are sitting there across from me while the two commanders are standing there, arms crossed. It was like kids on a playground, right?
Yeah, forcing them to make nice again.
They're like, you're the best pilot ever. We will never talk shit about you again. And you hear, and I, this goes on.
You're very good looking. I'm not very attractive.
This goes on way longer. It's very uncomfortable for me. It had to be horrible for them. And we walk away. I just wanted to, hey, just let's not do it again. This ought to be a lesson to you. I will come get you no matter what. And, so here we get shot down on Anaconda, and I don't know that it's Slab. I don't realize that he's actually the guy in the back. And we're on the ground. I end up next to him, and I'm like, who are you? And he's like, the asshole. I'm like, what asshole? I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, Brit. I'm like, I don't know Brit. Slavinsky. Oh, yeah, from that one. Yeah, okay.
From the awkward conversation a few nights ago.
Right. So, he was awesome. Him and Chapman hooked up with the AC-130 overhead. They arranged my wingman, Razor 4, came in, got us all, and,
When did, when you were coming in to that mountaintop, when did you realize that things were going astray?
Well, it started really with the first launch for the very first attempt. So the B-52 strikes were rolling in, but we had no knowledge of them where we were, right? Once again, the SATCOM communications were horrible. So I'd take off and head in for the infill, which was really supposed to be at the base of the mountain, at the base of Takrakar. And we had two different locations. So I would go to one, and Razor 4 would drop his guys, and then we'd link up aerial rejoin somewhere else. And the rule was, if you got there, you start your clock, wait 15 minutes. If the other guy doesn't show up, you do a radio search and go home, because you don't have the fuel to get home if you don't. So we try that. With this B-52 strike, we get called off. We return to forward operating base Gardez, and we wait. There's a lull in the bombing. All right, time to go. So we go again, turn back again. So now I'm not going to have enough fuel, to do this if I don't shut down. But I didn't want to shut down because the aircraft I had was notorious for electrical problems with generator swaps. So as you start and shut down an aircraft, you would swap from the auxiliary power to the main engines. And we had a maintenance problem.
Just didn't like it?
No. It had, the relays were slow, so it would create faults in some of the computers. Like the engines were controlled by computers. And there's a thing called a DECU I can't remember what it stands for, but it had a little code on it, you know, and a little hexadecimal code. And they'd say, it's got 88s, and you're good. Well, this was a Fox Bravo, and you look up a little checklist, Fox Bravo, soft fault, okay, you can fly, is what it says. So what we didn't know until about 2 years later is if you manually select the auxiliary, the reversionary portion of the engines, which is like a backup feature, the engine will run away, right? So the turbine will just get gas.
Like spin
crazy.
out of control?
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So we had, and Slab was saying afterwards, you see, I saw like a 10-foot flame come out of that thing. But yeah, it was bad. So, you know, we shut down, we're waiting, and then when we go to start up is when that happened. So now there's no way I'm taking him to a 12,000-foot mountain with an engine that just cooked. And so I called for a backup aircraft. And it turns out that was Razor 1 and 2, who had just done an infill of the coalition forces in that area. And they were just getting back to Bagram. So they put gas in the aircraft, and they turn right around, and they head back. Right? And this is where a lot of confusion on Razor 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, who was what and when. And they get there, and the crew chiefs recommend a front-end bump only, meaning the pilots will swap aircraft. They'll take the 2 aircraft we have and with a maintenance guy, and they'll fly them back to Bagram and fix it.
Yep.
And we'll take their helicopter and their crew, and we'll go do our mission, right? Because it's supposed to be a pretty simple infill. And so we take off, and ironically, I'd never met the crew. They were from another company, and they just got in country. So I'd never even met my crew chiefs. And, you know, you call them by position, you know, right gun, left gun, you know, so I don't need to know their names unless I get shot down.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what happens. But so we finally go up there. The mission happens. We separate. Razor 4 drops his guys off, goes to rejoin point. We go put our guys in. And when we touch down on the top of the hill, we're, you know, nobody shoots at us. There's no people up there, except we see some footprints, which is not uncommon. But still, the team leader needs to know that.
Concerning.
Right? And back then, the team leader had to take off his internal headset and put on an aircraft headset.
Yeah.
Because those were designed what they call Tempest. So you could, the Soviet Union could apparently hear intercommunications, you know, so you had this special thing. But the ground force didn't have this on their headsets because it's a powered unit, right? After that, I made them change that. But so he's still got his helmet off, so he can't talk to his guys. They just know it's time to get off, and he's giving them hand signals. So hold on. You know, there's a donkey over here. There's a machine gun, a Dishka, 14.5 millimeter, unmanned, and these footprints. So he's trying to figure out what he's going to do, and he puts before he takes off his headset from the aircraft, he says, all right, we're taking the LZ, you know, good luck, right? So he puts his back on, and while he's in mid switching headsets, the RPG runs through the middle of the aircraft, blows up inside, and exits the other side. So the 2 crew chiefs up front, the 2 main gunners, are incommunicado. They're shaken up. You know, it's kind of like in the cartoons. You know, oh.
Yeah.
And Slab is right there, and the team doesn't know what they're doing because they can't talk to him or us. And they're toward the back of the aircraft, ready to go with these big mountain rocks. You know, like the size of that damn refrigerator. And Neil Roberts is the first guy there, and I think he's standing behind the ramp hinge, which is where I talked about earlier. You know, when the guys would snap in, you always want to be on the other side of the hinge because if it goes down, you're going out. Which the aircraft, you know, you had the RPG, and then machine gun fire starts ripping through the airframe, and the electrical systems go out. So now there's nothing in the cockpit.
And you're still spinning on the ground.
Oh, yeah. So the thing will run without electricity, right? It's got little...
Yeah, once it's started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And...
so you mean like your primary flight display, your MFD, they all went dead on you?
Yeah, nothing, right?
Holy
and you
shit.
can hear it. You can hear the fans, the quiet of the fans from these, you know, computers and black boxes. You know, normally they're, you know, whirring away.
Yeah.
And you could hear them just kind of... And now the guns are no good, but the engines are still running. And I hear from the back, you know, fire in the cockpit, go, go, go. So I take the controls from my co-pilot and I take off. And when I did, because the engines are in reversionary mode, which is the backup mode, they droop. And you can hear the droop because there's no fans going. And you hear, you know, so I think I've lost an engine. So now my only choice is to dive down the hill and gain speed, regain rotor RPM. And at the bottom, I'll just, you know, auto rotate and crash at the bottom.
Oh yeah, what could go wrong with that? Sounds like a fucking great plan.
Well, right. Well, it's that or just die.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a saying, never stop flying the aircraft.
100%.
And so that's when Neil Roberts falls out. As he's falling out, the crew chief back there grabs him, except the crew chief's like a little peanut. He's a little guy.
Yeah, too much.
Neil Roberts is a big man. He's wearing that ruck, and the inertia just takes him off, and the gunner with him. Now he's hanging from that harness that we talked about earlier, and I'm diving down the hill, doing about probably 80 miles an hour, and dropping about 4,000 foot a minute. And
so he's literally doing the cartoonish hanging out behind the airplane.
Yeah, and I have no idea how close he's getting to the trees because I'm just skimming the trees coming down.
You knew he was hanging out the back?
No.
And so you probably didn't know that Neil had gone out the back either? Yeah.
No, and then so there was one gunner. We had one M60 machine gun in the back on the right rear. And so he is, he leans down and he's pulling up the gunner that's hanging out there. And he's not talking because his hands are busy and it's a push to talk.
Yeah.
The two guys up front still can't talk. And then they finally kind of, they're like, all right, hey, we're here, sir. We got both engines are running, because they kind of figured out what was going on. I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, we can hear the engines. I'm like, all right. So I start squeaking into power. It sounds okay. I get level flight. I'm like, okay, we're alive, right? And then they're like, sir, we had a guy fall out. And I wouldn't believe it. I guess I was in shock. I'm like, get a head count. I'm like, we don't have to do a head count. We saw him fall out. I'm like, get a head count. And they humored me. We got a head count, sir. And so, my first response was, well, we got to go back. And so we turned inbound, and the controls froze. So a Chinook controls, they will not move without hydraulic fluid.
Okay.
Right. So, the machine guns and the RPGs, now everything is separated and redundant. So it took out 3 electrical systems and 2 hydraulic systems. Actually 3 when you consider the utility system. So, and it had to be on the return side because every time I moved the controls, it would squirt out fluid. But if it was on the pressure side, it would have just poof, one big thing. So I had about 50 seconds worth of control for each can of fluid that the crew chief then put in. And we had 3 cans of fluid in the back, spare. Because Chinooks are notorious for leaking hydraulic fluid, right? So, we get everybody's on board now. We're turning inbound. The controls lock up. I'm looking around, and I see the entire battle in Objective Remington unfold beneath me. There's a terrain feature called the Whale, which is where they were assaulting, and I could see all of it, but I couldn't move the controls. And I was like, sorry guys, we're done. Like, what do you mean? Like, I can't move the controls, we're done. And then all of a sudden they moved, and it was the crew chief.
Fuck, back there pouring shit in.
And he's got a little handle, right? He's like, but he can't talk to tell me because he's busy with his hands. And then, so he does that, and then he starts returning fire with the M60, because we're coming around. And I'm like, yeah. So we turn inbound now, really straight on to the LZ there, and the controls lock up again. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. This time, and then all of a sudden the controls come back again. And this guy has not said a word to me, but I know what's happening. He's filling up fluid. So now I'm like, all right, guys, we're done. I can either crash on the objective, we will never leave, or we can try to make a friendly location in the battle below. So I made a slight turn to the left, started a rate of descent that I thought would be survivable if we didn't hit something. So about 300 foot a minute and about 70 knots. And the funny thing is, your vision kind of comes in.
Oh, for sure.
And we actually had a battery-powered attitude indicator that I didn't even notice, right? And all it had is attitude, speed, vertical speed, that kind of thing. And my copilot starts calling out altitude, speed. I'm like, where are you getting that? He taps on it. He's like, right here. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So we're coming in, and I'm not going to make a friendly location at that rate of descent. So we're going to shoot long, north, in between the friendly forces and Fob Gardez. And as we come in about the last 75 feet or so, the controls lock up again. And I'm like, all right, maybe now we're going to see if that rate of descent was any good. Except now we start sliding to the right, and I can't stop it. I can't move the stick in the other direction. Luckily, I had one more push in the pedals, and I swung the nose around so we would hit, straight on instead of sideways. If we had sideways, we would have rolled and we'd have exploded. And then I had one more push in the power, in the thrust. So I did that, and we hit the ground at about a 20-degree angle of bank, 10 degrees nose high. And I remember hitting the ground kind of hard. It actually screwed up my crew chief's back. In the back, he was thrown to the floor, fucked up his back. But we're on the ground. The aircraft's still running. And I pull off the power levers. Guy in the right seat jams on the rotor brake. I'm like, we're alive.
Yeah.
And so we get off. I've never been on the ground before. You sort of train it, but not really to the extent that you'd think. And, I'm good with a rifle. I'm good with a pistol, but I don't know anything about, how do I get flanked? How do I protect my flank? That kind of stuff. So I'm talking to Slab, and he's like, we had to go back up on the mountain, get our guy, right? And at first he thought Tarkagara was like right there, and they were going to walk up the nearest mountain. I'm like, that's not it. It's over there. Okay. So when Razor 4 comes in to get us, the plan is to just go to the top of the mountain, drop them off, get Neil, and we'll come back out. Except the aircraft doesn't have the performance to do that. It can't go that high with that kind of weight. So Slab asked me, he's like, hey, can you just stay here and we'll send somebody for you later? And I'm looking around going, my air crew here in the middle of the battle. Yes, but can you spare a guy that knows what he's doing on the ground? And as soon as I said it, I was embarrassed for asking it, because the look he gave me was like, and he and I have talked about this over a beer, and he's like, you're an Army guy. What the hell, right? I'm like, well, you're a Navy guy. Give me a guy. And I guess he was going to leave me Chapman, and they fought for a minute. And I said, just go, And then, who was it? Pete Blaber, I think, wouldn't allow us to stay. He's like, no, you're not doing that. You don't know what the big picture is. And, he did. So instead, Razor 4 took us back to Gardez. It's about a 5-minute flight. Drop us off. Slab kicks off all his gear he doesn't need, and they go back. And then, of course, that aircraft gets shot up. Slab ends up on the mountain, and that's a whole nother his story, really. But so Razor 4 comes back to the FOB. He has 0 gas. I mean, the engine's flamed out when he landed. And so there was always a plan to bring fuel down to do a big rescue mission, except when we're looking at the aircraft, all the wire bundles have been shot through, hydraulics. I mean, the thing was not flyable. You couldn't start it again. Yeah. So that had confusion that's in other books about back at Bagram. They were reconfiguring for a refueling aircraft, and they stopped, and no one knew why. That's because I called up and said, don't bother. That thing's not flyable. Yeah. So now you've had 2 aircraft essentially shot down in the same LZ, and then Razor 1 and 2 come down, except he can't get situational awareness as to what's going on. They actually think they're coming to get me. So they fly by my aircraft in the valley, and they're all looking at it like, isn't that where we're supposed to go? And then they get a call from a P3 called Toolbox that says, no, here's your coordinates, go here. And it was the coordinates where we'd both been shot up, the other 2 aircraft. So he goes in there, but he doesn't know. So he sends Razor 2 back to Gardez to let him kind of see what's going on, and he'll bring him forward. That's why the Rangers were split up. So when they come back to Gardez, I go running over there to give them hey, here's what happened. If you got to go back, here's what you got to do. And Razor 1 comes in, and he is not so lucky, and RPGs to the engine. And had he been another 50 feet further forward, he could have done exactly what I did, but he didn't. He was on the side of the slope where they had no choice but to just hit it. Yeah. And then, once again, that's their story to tell.
For sure. What do you make of the, I guess, controversy would be the only term between Chapman and Slab? In my mind, I know Slab. I worked with him operationally for the first time in 2003. He augmented us in the initial invasion of Iraq. And, I would say it to him if he was sitting here. He was obviously deeply impacted by what happened up there. And I don't understand. I don't know at what level it seemed it was like, well, this guy's going to get a Medal of Honor and this one should. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't know where it came from. I'm curious if you have any other insight into that, because to me it's ridiculous. It's like, Jesus.
No, because it happened years later, and I had kind of pulled away from the community for a little bit. My wife died in 2012, and I wanted to change a venue, so I went to West Point to be the detachment commander up there, flying the general in the skydiving team. And so I'd kind of cut all ties with the community, not like in a bad way. I just didn't talk to anybody. And so I don't know what happened, that transpired, because I think they each got appropriate awards originally. And if they're going to give the Medal of Honor to somebody, I mean, who am I to say? I like both guys. The one thing that...
It seems like it diminished both to a degree, and I don't think it had to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't know. It was well above their echelon.
Yeah.
I know
both of our pay grades, for sure.
I know Slab didn't want it.
Yeah.
But and he's got it. So
yeah,
got to live with it.
Yeah, man. And then, so that was the end of your rotation, and then I was, reading through the book. You were there for the recovery of Red Wings as well.
Yeah.
So out of the pot into the frying pan?
Well, I mean, years later, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so here's something to think about, right? So in the beginning, 2001, 2002, and the first part of the Iraq invasion, we're all doing stuff that, either you've seen in movies or you heard about from Vietnam, and we're trying to replicate that. But, in Vietnam, helicopters were simple. They were Hueys, right? They were very simple. You could get shot down, someone could pick you up, you go back, you get a new one, you go back into the fight, right? And there's a lot of guys with medals of honor that did that, right?
Yeah.
Well, how did that guy go back 5 times? Well, because they had 5 more aircraft for him. In the special ops community, there's not enough.
Yeah, it's not the case.
Rotor wing to go around, right? I mean, that's the whole extortion thing, right? It's because there was not enough airframes to go around. So, in the beginning, there's nothing overhead. I mean, in Tarkagar's case, it was an unarmed pred, right? And I think eventually a Agency 1 showed up, which was the only armed ones. Communications were terrible, and people were learning things that, I was able to use several times in the ensuing years. And I would say, like my boss, I do emergency management up in my county, and my boss will introduce me. Oh, it's Al Mack. He was a, pilot, special ops. He was shot down, and then he moves on. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. That was like in 2002. I think my last combat mission was at the end of 11 into 12. And I was never successfully engaged again if I didn't want to be. And I say it that way because I have done, landings to the X or HUD exfils, and I knew, or CASEVACs, and I knew I was going to take abuse, but I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew the aircraft was going to get torn up. This was a surprise, but I learned, and I was able to use that during other quick reaction force missions. I was able to talk to, I did a lot of work with the SEALs, probably the most work with the SEALs, and then the Rangers, and a little bit with the guys out of Bragg, and then some little bit with the other white soft guys.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of experience with the guys out of the East Coast there. And I had a reputation, I would say, right? I mean, I've got a bit of an ego. I'm a pilot.
We all do.
But I would say, and I've said in here, I wasn't the best, but I was probably the most aggressive, which I always took as a compliment, because I would hear that from, I heard that once from a command master chief. Actually, we were ripping out with the guys from Gold. And when I took over as the rotor wing guy, 2 weeks in, the guy says, "What's different about you than the other guys?" I was like, "I don't know what you mean." He goes, "You're more," and he couldn't find the word, and then he goes, "aggressive." And I said, "Yes, I am. That's the difference. I will take you where you want to go if I can, and I will give you everything you ask for if I can," because I always viewed it as, in some kinds it was to the wrong degree. I would say, you need 20 guys. If I give you 20 guys, you get 20. Because I viewed it as the more shooters on target, the more success you are likely to have in not being overwhelmed. But anyway, all that being said, I learned that from Anaconda, right? And I was able to apply it later. So when Red Wings happened, it was actually a Marine Corps mission, right? And we were going to assist. And we were going to put in, the 4-man recce element, Mike Murphy and those guys, Luttrell.
Which, for clarity, in Konar, 4 dudes is a fucking bad idea.
Yeah. And, interestingly, the year before, there was an SF group wanted going down near Kandahar, up in the mountains just north of there. And it was like 4 or 5 guys. And our battalion commander didn't like the idea, and he said, "Hey, look, what are you going to do when they come at you with superior forces numbers?" And one of the guys, who was obviously young, said, "We will fall back with superior training and superior firepower." And all his buddies looked at him like, "You actually said that in front of these guys?"
Yeah, that's what it says on the recruiting poster. That's not the reality of life.
No, and I mean, when you're outnumbered, you're outnumbered.
Yeah.
And those guys were just, you cannot put a group of guys in a hill overlooking a village and not be heard. And the guys below, or maybe up in the mountains, what do they got to do during the day? They're not playing video games.
Yeah.
Hey, Ahmed, let's go take a look and see what that noise was.
Yeah.
And they go up and they find him. But what was going to happen is, so the difference between the Chinooks at the time, you had the Delta models out of Savannah who were doing the mission, and you had the Echo models. We had two of those, and I was the flight lead for those. The difference is the 47 Echo has the terrain following radar and some other special equipment. The problem is that equipment weighs something, right?
Yep.
So I give up either fuel or cargo. Well, the distances weren't big, so fuel wasn't an issue. Cargo was, people, right? And the Delta models could carry about 2,000 pounds more than me because they didn't have the other stuff. So they were assigned the mission of Red Wings. They did the infills. They were going to bring the Marines in. And so we were doing 1 week at a time of quick reaction force, QRF. And the 3rd Battalion guys had it with the Delta models. And so they were handing over to me the day before Red Wings was to kick off so that they could have all the Deltas to carry all the weight, right? They're the heavy lifters. And I'm there with the QRF because I can fly in just about any weather that they can't. So it all makes sense. So I get up in the morning, I go into the talk, get my coffee, everybody's quiet and very intense. And I sit down next to the battalion commander, and he's like, "What's going on, sir?" And he's like, points at the monitor. He's like, "We launched the QRF." I'm like, looking at my watch. I'm like, "I'm the QRF right now." And he's like, No. Major Reich was here. They were all dressed. Obviously they were down there, so they beat me there. It was probably not a bad choice. And so I'm sitting there drinking my coffee, and I watch them make an approach to what we called HLZ Thresher, which was really not big enough to be a landing zone, but it was an opening in the trees for logging. And they drop out the fast ropes, and a guy steps up with an RPG, shoots it right up into the aft transmission area. And you see the plume on the IR, whatever platform it is. I don't know what it was. And once the plume dies off, you see the aircraft kind of wobble away and then just come apart.
Fuck.
And fall down the hill. So now it's obvious what's just happened. So I'm like, I'm ready, and he goes, "All right, go." So now I've got the SEALs that I'm working with, which are not part of that organization, right? Your old organization.
Yeah.
And we run down to the airfield. We get in. We crank. The crew chiefs already have the aircraft ready. I just have to turn the main engines on, and we haul ass. And I'm doing 150, maybe even 160, which is really fast for a Chinook that's heavily loaded. I got like 20-something guys on board, which I know is too much for that altitude. So I'm dumping fuel. And now I got nothing to do but just get there.
Yeah.
And I remember the aircraft's quiet. No one's talking. The radios are quiet. And I'm just thinking to myself, what am I going to do when I get there? There's nowhere to land. I got to go to the same spot. And
fuck that.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden I get a call, divert to Jalalabad. We're going to reassess the mission.
Put a plan together.
Together. So I divert over there. We go inside. It's the same group of SEALs, same command.
Yep.
And so we're coming up with an idea. And then the problem at that time was that the weather was thunderstorms every night. Right? As soon as it got dark, thunderstorms built. You had 15, 20 minutes of a window, and then a second bit of thunderstorms would come in, and maybe you get a second opportunity to go in, and probably not, right? So there were some nights I got in 2 or 3 times, other times it was once. But so we're down there coming up with it, and someone decides, away from us, back at Bagram, we're just going to start Red Wings early. So they send all the remaining Delta models down. They're going to take my SEALs, they're going to take the Marines in, except no one tells me that. And I could have easily told them, there's a thunderstorm right down the valley near Asadabad. There's no way you're getting in there. I can do it though, right? This aircraft will do it. And they're like, nope, we're going to do this. So they go down, they run into the weather, they turn around, and that's why it took so long to get guys in. That's why Rob O'Neill and the guys he was with took off by vehicle
Yeah.
to try to walk in because it was obvious that you weren't getting aircraft in there that night. And then we certainly weren't going in daylight because in the Konar, or Kunar, however you say it.
It's quite an argument, actually, on how you say it, Kunar or Konar.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either.
But there's like 3 ways in for a helicopter based on the altitudes, right?
Yeah.
You could go in 2 ways that are very obvious to everybody, to include the enemy, and 1 way that only the Echo models could go because it's perpetually cloud shrouded, right? So I can go through it with the terrain following radar, but the Deltas can't do it. So we're stuck going the other way, right? And that is the most horrific flying I think I've ever done, was going in there night after night, knowing that, what was going on. And we did that. I actually the next night we put the guys in, as the SEALs, my SEALs, we'll call them. And it was kind of funny because I said, all right, look, you're going to get a 100-foot rope, fast rope. And they're like, all right, we're good with that. Well, 100 feet's a long way to slide down a fast rope.
Yeah, it is.
And my wingman comes out, we're like this on 2 different spurs, and he goes to a 100-foot hover, and they all come down. And my co-pilot's flying in the right seat, and he loses a visual of the terrain. He's like, I got no references. And I looked out, and I got a tree right below me. I was like, I get the controls. I have good reference. And the crew chief says, sir, come down 20. Well, instead of 90 foot, we're going to do, 70 or 60. And he's like, come down another 20, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Hold you down. We're like 5 feet off the ground, and the guys rope out from 5 feet.
Greatly appreciated.
Which is funny because,
the
the troop commander met me a couple of, 2 weeks later when they finally came out of the field, and he was all pissed. He goes, how come these guys did 100 feet and my guys did 5, and.
Because we're fucking with you, dick.
Come on. I was, I didn't want to say, well, I'm better than him.
Yeah.
But, it was a little bit of luck. And I kind of explained it away as, well, different angles. And
differences in terrain, too.
It was briefed.
Yeah.
And I saw him at Slab's Medal of Honor ceremony, and we talked about that. And I said, well, I didn't want to say it, but, I was better than the other guys.
There's levels to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a rough one. How did they walked out everything to suitable LZs, right, for the recovery?
Nope, same field. So
Really?
what walked in was, I believe, was an SF guy with his ANA SF guys.
Yeah.
And they were like mountain goats. Like that guy was a little skinny guy, and they were all little skinny guys, and they just up the mountain and down and secured him while we did the pickup.
Gotcha.
Right? So the issue there was, so we know where he is, and
we're talking about Marcus at this
Marcus
point.
Luttrell, right? So we're actually practicing for a dignified transfer of the bodies that we already have, right? So the guy that worked for me directly, an E7, Trey Ponder, was killed on that. He was augmenting the crew, and good friend of mine. So that was rough. But we were practicing the, moving the caskets to the C-17 and all that stuff, and the captain that was in charge of us comes running out, Army captain. He's like, Al, you got to come with me. We got a survivor. Like, okay. So someone else does my pallbearer duties, and I go back and, we're in the jock, and the Air Force PJ, we'll call him Tom, is in charge. And he says, yep, we get this guy. He's right here. Now, the previous days, the A-10s and the HH-60s, which are the Air Force Jolly Green guys, were flying up and down the valley looking for people, dropping survivor pods, and just all kinds of stuff. And they're like, the 60 is going to go pick them up. It's right here in this terraced field. And I'm looking at the image, and I'm looking at how they're going to have to do it. I'm like, there's no way that a 60 can get in there. They don't have the power. That's got to be us, and that's my guy that got shot down, right? I said, so I'm going to go get him. And now it's this wasn't nice. I was like,
Yeah.
And, the 60 guys are just got to stand there like, okay. And Tom was really smart. He goes, all right, Al, you can do the pickup. He goes, but the 60 guys have stripped their aircraft. There's no armor. There's no guns. They have the performance. But you can do it. He goes, but we have one chance to get in there with the thunderstorms, and we still have, another like 50 guys to bring in because we still have missing people.
Yeah.
He goes, and the 60 can't do it because he's going to Thresher. He goes, you pick. Well, there's no choice there. I was like, all right, fine. They can pick them up. I said, but I'm planning the mission. So the 60 guys are like, hey, sure. So I planned all of the pre-assault fires and egress and ingress routes, all that kind of stuff. printed out all their imagery, told them what to do. And I went and sat down with the AC-130 and the A-10 guys, you know, like sat down with them with my maps. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. You know, you're gonna shoot here, then you're gonna lift fire, shift it over here, turn to diversionary fires. I need the biggest explosions you can give me. Because we didn't have the ROE to necessarily shoot anything because we still had friendlies.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do was draw attention long enough for the 60 to get in, and then you bring the fire back in behind them on the key terrain.
Yeah.
And then they call out, they move the fire back over to another location, big booms. And that's the stuff Marcus saw that's described in his book. You know, he's, oh man, yeah, that was all me.
I feel like the technical description of that operation would be a fuck show.
Yeah.
From soup to nuts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. Where were you staged in the invasion of Iraq?
I was in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I tried to stay away from Iraq as long as I could because I was very comfortable with Afghanistan. By this time, you know, I had it all. Pretty much our operating areas were memorized. I knew how much performance without doing a lot of math.
Yeah.
And I was comfortable.
That's fair.
And I didn't get to Iraq until like 06. I went to Al-Assad first.
Okay.
And then Balad.
Yeah, we had a spicy first target with some of your guys.
Yeah, I think I've heard you talk about it. It's with the Kajaki.
I don't remember. It was like the number one chem bio target, which was an agricultural school. But
yeah,
we started taking fire about a minute out. That was fun.
Yeah, we had one of the flight engineers was shot in the head.
Correct.
Glenn Earl.
Yeah, survived too.
He works for the regiment now. Great guy.
Yeah.
Great guy.
One of those 47s on short final, what the people had to navigate on the way out was the flapping ramp like you were talking about, because the hydraulic fluid, shockingly enough, will come out of a hole that is created by a bullet.
It will. It will. It sucks. You know,
I don't think the pilot was digging it either.
No.
I think they might have had another little jerry can incident back there where they were pumping hydraulic fluid in there.
No, I tell you, a Chinook is a dream to fly when everything works.
It's huge, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's about 50 foot long. The rotors, they overlap a little bit, so it's about 100 foot long, rotor tip to rotor tip, and about 60 feet wide. So if there's no dust, I could land in landing zones that Blackhawks could land in. You add a little bit of dust and
get spicy.
You got to make it bigger.
You mentioned your wife briefly and her passing. I'm assuming you were married during the earlier portions of your military career. What happened?
Yeah, so I met her in El Paso. She was an Army medic in a hospital there, and I was an aircraft mechanic in the CAV. We met. We were both going to get out of the Army at the same time. And, we were like, 19 years old, maybe 20. And she lived in California. I lived in New Hampshire. So we decided the only way to stay together was for one of us to stay in the Army, and the other one would be, a strap hanger, and we'd go wherever. And we thought she would have the better opportunity, so I was going to get out and work for, Boeing or something. And she had an incident. She had an NCOIC who was, by today's standard, by then, completely inappropriate. He wanted sexual favors to get a certain schedule.
Yeah.
And when she wouldn't do that, he stuck her on all the bad stuff. And then she complained up the chain. And the female sergeant major at the hospital took her aside and said, "Hey, look, you're not going to complain about something like that. Suck it up and deal with it."
Oh, really?
Yeah. She's like, "Suck it up," literally. And so, Linda decided, screw that. So I stayed in and she didn't. And I got assigned to Germany, and we went there, and it was great. And everything was fine until I did an assignment in Korea, the one I talked about before going to instructor pilot school. And she had a little bit of a meltdown, and she attempted suicide. So that's something I thought would keep me out of the 160th, and it turned out it didn't. Because enough years had gone by, it looked like everything was okay.
Yeah.
But you can tie it right to Operation Anaconda. Remember I talked about in Desert Storm, I didn't call home.
Yes.
Or somebody else did. Well, in this case, we were at Gardez, and an agency guy hands me his Iridium, and he says, "Hey, you might want to call your wife. This is about to make CNN." And I said, "I can't," So what comes on? 2 Chinooks, 8 dead. Well, there's only 4 of us as far as she knows, and I'm one of the flight leads. So the chances of me being one of those 8 are pretty high.
Yeah.
And I didn't call. So she found out when I got home that I had an opportunity to call, and she never forgave me for that. And though it was never like on the forefront of everything, it would come up. Well, that time in Anaconda, you didn't call, you don't care about me, that kind of thing. And I deployed a lot because I was a flight lead. I was gone all the time.
Crazy operational tempo.
Yeah, the op tempo was a killer, and so she turned to alcohol and prescription opioids, and she would intentionally hurt herself to get pain meds.
Really?
One time she kicked a wall with her foot till she broke her toes, and she had a lot of knee surgeries, and it was bad, and I was quite the enabler, I wanted it to work, and she would assure me this time it's good. And we went a couple of years like that, and she would have periods where it was really good, and I could go away and she'd be fine, and other times I'd come back and things weren't so good. And they slowly got worse. And the icing on the cake was Bo Bergdahl. So that year, like that calendar year, it turns out I was gone about 340, 350 days out of the year, just doing multiple. We did some stuff in Africa. And, I'd go there. I'd come home for 5 days and then go to Afghanistan or to Iraq, and I was just gone all the time. And so she's expecting me home in 24 hours, right? We've been chasing Bergdahl, and we're doing a replacement flight leads, and a guy comes in, shake hands, here's my stuff, good luck, go get him. And I go down to Kandahar, go through customs to go home, but I'm going to be home, in less than 24 hours. And I get a phone call in customs. Hey, is there a CW5 Mack in the room? Like, that can't be good, right? These guys should have no thing for me, right? So I come over, and it's the officer in charge at Sharana, which is where most of this stuff happened. And he's like, Al, Chad had a heart attack. That was my replacement.
Oh, shit.
He went to the gym, worked out, came back to the planning area, and dropped dead.
Fuck.
On the spot. Now, luckily, he did it in front of 2 EMTs, and we had the SRT next door, the surgical resuscitation team, a bunch of high-speed doctors. And so they were able to bring him back long enough to get him on an aircraft. They got him to Bagram. He coded a couple of times, and he's still flying today. But I had to come back. So they sent an aircraft because we're chasing Bergdahl. This is important. And I come back, I go flying him, Bergdahl mission. And now I got to call my wife and say, I'm not coming home in 24 hours. I got to do his rotation, which is 90 days. So she's expecting me home. I stay another 90 days because there's just not enough people to backfill me either. And so I go home, and that is when I made her go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was the worst thing I could have done because she went there and drank, and they called the cops.
She went to an AA meeting and drank?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. And of course, those people that are there that are, important in it, they don't want that. And they know that they're not enablers. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And so she doesn't come home that night because, she got arrested. I finally figured that out. And so now we're fighting about this, and it just kind of goes downhill. I call it in here, Bergdahl tips the scales. It's like we were kind of working it out, and then it just went, and she just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. She had 3 DWIs. Each one was like $14,000 for me. You're fighting it.
That's rough.
Yeah. And so finally I moved out of the house. She lasted about 2 weeks and then overdosed. And
that sucks, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But, it's one of those things. It was probably going to happen based on some things that are, much more detailed. I took a lot out of this. The book was a lot thicker, and I actually originally titled it Couldn't Quit, right? And my publisher looked at it and said, hey, that's great. That could be its own book, but we're a military history company. How about you just leave a flavor of the family drama in there and stick mostly with military stuff? So I did. So there's about 4 chapters that came out that really detail her spiral and how I did or didn't deal with it. But, the opioid crisis now is so bad.
It's real.
And we were just at the tip of it, and now it's terrible.
Yeah, it really is.
But, the regiment, to their credit, they were super. They were like very supportive. They said, Al, you can do whatever you want to do. we'll create a position for you. I can't remember what they called it, but I was going to be the face of the regiment. They said you could deploy if you want, stay home if you want. All we ask is that you go out and, hang out with the ground force, all of them, and just sort of tell them, sort of an unofficial, like a goodwill ambassador almost. Mm-hmm. And that would have been great. But I was like, no, I got to get out of here. It's the same reason I didn't retire earlier and go as a CMI, a civilian mission instructor. I'm either in it or I'm not, right? Which is why I said I kind of broke contact. I didn't want to know what they were doing. Really the Bin Laden, the Abbottabad mission kind of was a tipping point for me. It's like, all right, he's finally dead. I wasn't on the mission.
Yep.
I'm out of here. Right? So they offered me some jobs. The West Point one came open, and I got called up to New York City to unveil a statue, right? The horse soldier statue at Ground Zero. And I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Maybe I'll throw my name in the hat for the West Point job. I did, and the general for aviation was one of my old commanders, and he said, tell Al he can not have that job. That's going to be someone else. He can have whatever job he wants,
but
right?
Not that one.
And they offered me some really nice jobs. I was going to be the chief of the shoot down assessment team, which is kind of like somebody gets shot down, you send a team out, like the NTSB, right? They figure out what happened and what you can do to fix it. And that's the one I probably would have taken. But the general at West Point saw my paperwork and was like, I want to meet this guy. So I go out, interview with him, and he's like, you're the guy. And it's a by name request. The 2-star general doesn't get to overrule a 3-star general.
Rock, paper, rank.
So up I went, and
then you learned to skydive.
I did.
At the academy of all places.
I'm scared of heights. I can't go up a ladder without And I got to befriend a couple of senior cadets, firsties, and they asked me in my very first mission, which was skydiving for them, and we're going to fly it. They're like, hey, sir, could you be our mentor? And I'm like, sure. And they run off, all happy. And I look at my co-pilot. What did I just...
Yeah, what did I just volunteer for?
I don't know. So anyway, I got to know the guys, and the idea was that I would, they would ask me questions, and, cadets ask really tough questions. They don't ask black and white, yes, no. It's like something, there's always it depends, and you got to explain, how do I deal with a senior NCO as a lieutenant? Well, it depends, right?
Yeah.
So by the end of the year, I know these guys really well, and they're like, you got to come skydive with us. I'm like, no, right? Like, come on. So I do it. My first jump is out of the Lakota, my helicopters, with the parachute team coach, a guy named Tom Falzone. He's got thousands of jumps. Great guy. And so I go out, I remember just scooting up to the edge of the thing all strapped in, and when he goes over, I just, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. And they jumped with me, the cadets, and I was like, I got to do this. This is awesome. And so the next year, they trained me up, and then the cadets actually coached me, right? So the cadre taught me, and then the cadets coached me.
Yeah.
And then I was, I got up to a B license, and then I retired.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
What a weird place to learn how to skydive.
Yeah. So you had to have...
Especially as the guy there who's dedicated to fly them.
Yeah. Well, it was cool because, we could go out and, the plane, the parade field, you had to have, I think, 50 jumps to get on the plane, right? So I was trying to get there. And I remember doing that it was like a hop and pop, so the clouds were down. So we were lower than I wanted to be anyway. You jump out, throw out the chute, and then you got to get in the stack. And I don't fly nearly as good as them. I mean, I did really well, in free fall. I could fly nicely, but, put me under canopy now. These guys are a lot lighter than me. I did gain a little weight since then, but I was still outweighed them by a number, and, I had to work at staying in my position, but it was fun.
Yeah.
Really, it was a good time.
Yeah, it's one of my all-time favorite hobbies for sure. When did you start thinking about writing a book? And why did you decide to eventually write one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the premiere for the Horse Soldier movie came out, and I was asked to attend it. And I had just so Mark Nooch was, the team leader there. He was writing a book, and he had a guy named Jim DeFelice who wrote American Sniper, is writing the book for him. So he lives in Orange County, New York with me, and he came to my work and interviewed me for the book. And while we're talking, he says, you tell a good story. Why don't you write a book? And I'm like, I can't. I said, the guys in the community will hate me, right? I mean, you know how this goes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't, you know. So I wrote a fictional book, which was horrible. And, you know, it was my first attempt.
Was it about gay vampires?
No. Well, maybe.
It could have been.
It could have been in one of the chapters I didn't write. But it was aviation related. Some guys retire and they go do some things,
Yeah.
you know. And I'm actually rewriting it now. The basic premise is still good, I think. But the writing was, I did it in first person because that was easy. Now I'm doing it in multiple POVs. But anyway, So we're at the premiere, and Jim DeFelice is having bourbons with me. And he goes, so what about that book? You gonna write it? I'm like, Jim, I can't. They're gonna crucify me if I do this. And he goes, you just got to do it. He goes, your story needs to be told. And I was like, you know, I think you're right. And so, of course, I was drinking.
Yeah.
Like, you're right.
The best of ideas.
Yeah. And so the next day I started writing. And it took about 2 years to get to the point where, you know, when I pitched it, they said, okay. And then it was another year. It took 9 months to get through the Pentagon, which was a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be 60 days, and it took 9 months.
How heavy of a scalpel did they take to the manuscript?
It wasn't bad. I mean, there's some stuff. There's no reference to the Tier 1 units.
Yeah.
It's, you know, SOF and SEALs.
Yeah.
But you don't talk about the other stuff. They did take out some other operations, some names. What was funny is they crucified names that weren't real. They were pseudonyms anyway. Because everybody I put in the book, I either called them and said, hey, can I use your name?
Yeah.
Here's what I'm doing. And they'd either say yes or no. I said, well, what do you want to be called? You know, and we'd come up with a name. And because sometimes I'd use a stupid name, like the sponge thing. And like, hey, I'm going to call you Harvey Ferd. How about? And they give you a real name that's pretty cool. It's like, all right, we'll use that. But the guys that were, redacting, redacted them anyway. You can't use these names. I'm like, they're not real.
Fake names.
Yeah, they're not real.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That perfectly defines the bureaucracy of the government and military industrial complex right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. And it took 9 months to do it.
Yeah. Redact a fake name. Awesome.
Yeah. And they, but that was really about it. So it wasn't too bad. But I had to wait.
Yeah. What is it, if you had to distill it down to one thing, somebody hears us talking today, and they're like, okay, I want to check out your book, Razor 03. What would you want them to get out of it?
How things were different in the beginning, right? So things that guys from that time frame, 01, 02, 03, or at the beginning of Iraq, what we dealt with, it's not the same as now. I mean, now you've got, people in a jock can tell you, hey, we saw something in the west side of the compound. Go look under that tarp. That's kind of insane, right? I mean, and the toll it takes on you and your family, because the op tempo is just such that, we expected to be home. We were designed to go do something and come home, right? So just before Tora Bora happens, like November of 01, we're preparing to go home, right? That's the plan, is we're going to move all the special forces teams, all the SF teams, to C-130 capable strips so they can be resupplied, and we're leaving, right? That's why TF Sword went home, right? They're part of a force that's an alert force. And so they went home, and we did all their stuff overseas, and then we're going to get out of there. All of us going to leave, right?
Yeah.
And, that's the big question, is how long should we have stayed? I don't know. But I know we planned on staying 5-6 months.
Yeah.
And we were leaving. And then Tora Bora happened, and then, Anaconda, and then it just kept, staying. And so what I want people to realize is when people say, thank you for your service, I hear that, and sometimes I'm a little embarrassed. And it's like, I enjoyed most of it, quite frankly. It's what I wanted to do. I was a volunteer. I was with people I wanted to be with. But it isn't me that deserves those thank yous. It's the families, that are putting up with you going and coming and going and not knowing what you're doing and seeing the news and all that stuff. And that's really what kind of, my wife had problems before, from a childhood, a really crappy childhood, and it never got better. And then my deployments made it.
That grind's not going to help make it any better.
And it made it worse. And I really, as an enabler, I want people to understand what an enabler is, that you can, kind of help that person keep doing what they're doing, or you can dig your heels in and, help them fix it, right? You can't fix it. That was one of the things I learned, because when I tried to fix it, I made it worse.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of things I want them to realize, is how things were a little bit different. There was some cool operations, that you don't hear the details. Certainly you don't hear about it from the pilots. Heck, every movie I've seen that involves special forces, like The Rock or, White House Down, that kind of stuff. The helicopters come in, they're badass, and the first bullet that gets shot at them, they all freak out. We're getting shot at.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is not what happens. I told Jerry Bruckheimer that at a pre-party for the premiere. I said, hey, I hope you didn't, make us look bad. That really sucks. And he goes, I think you're going to like it. He goes, just keep in mind, we made a movie, not a documentary.
Entertainment trumps realism and authenticity in that industry.
But he didn't make us look like buffoons.
Yeah. No, the experiences I had with the 160th was anything other than buffoons. They were some of the craziest / ballsiest pilots that I've ever been around.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
I
is.
mean, the 47s plucked us, I don't know how many times, up in all the valleys you didn't want to be in. It's like, hey, it took us a really long time to walk here. Can you guys just maybe put one wheel down on the top of the structure and we'll climb in? They're like, yep, no problem.
You may have been on the one I did that, actually.
We had to get back because we were ripping like the next day.
Did the is that the one that the uniform element got heat stroke?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I told the commander, I said, look, here's the deal. The only place I can pick you up is either the infill or the target. There's nothing in between. There's no pickup in between, period. Don't let it happen. Yeah, okay. You guys end up in contact. You're not moving. Hey, we need exfil, ladder exfil. Well, we don't want to do ladder if we can help it. Anyway, we want Chalk 2 first. And it's dark, right? So Chalk 2, a guy named Red Bull, goes in. And I'm watching him from a distance away. And he kind of comes in. He pauses. And he pulls out. And I call him, like, dude, what did you do a go around? He goes, no, I got 21 Eagles. What did you do? And he's like, I did a one-wheel landing. I'm like, because now I got to do it, right? But it's my co-pilot.
Now you got to put 2 down.
I'm like, dude, one wheel's harder.
The gauntlet has been thrown.
Oh, yeah. So we, one of the recce guys out of Colorado, I'm not going to use his name, but he, the crew chief actually falls out of the Chalk 2 aircraft, and he grabs him and pulls him in, while he's crawling up what we call the stubby wings, which is little stubs on the sides of the ramp. But we came out of there, and I remember being pissed, going, you guys have got to stop doing that. And they're like, but you can do it. This is and they're like, I don't want to do it.
But you can.
Right. But yeah. And that's the thing with the SEAL. The Rangers did the same thing, but the SEALs were in the mountains. So it was a bigger challenge to do that stuff. The Rangers I mostly worked with in Iraq, and it was kind of flat and easy to deal with.
Yeah. Different challenges, though.
Yeah.
A lot more sand. What are you doing with your life now?
So I retired in 2016 up in Orange County, New York, which is just north of West Point. And I was lucky enough to land a job as the Deputy Commissioner of Emergency Services. So I run the Emergency Management Division, Emergency Operations Center. So I deal with storms and floods and COVID pandemic and big events. We just did an air show the other day. We're responsible for all of the infrastructure and the safety network there. And I'm remarried to a wonderful woman who's just super. Now I have a blended family with my 2 sons. One flies F-18s for the Navy, and the other was a Chinook crew chief in A Company, 2nd Battalion. So he got shot down like 3 times in the Panjwai area, in the fish hook in that area. So he finally got out. He's like, yeah, I had enough.
Yeah. Critical question. Yeah. What does your son think of the movie Maverick?
Ian, well, I loved it. And I told him, I said,
most do. I mean, he's a fucking American hero. I think we should have a holiday for Maverick.
It's just pretty cool.
My wife hates the movie.
Yeah.
And I swear to God, she does it just to be contrarian. I may or may not turn it on when she comes home, though, and just like sit there or take pictures of me watching it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm on mission. I got to make sure that Mav makes it through. She's like, how many fucking times are you going to watch this? I'm like, I don't know. I'm considering getting a helmet.
It's fun.
It's
Hey,
just like,
no, I thought it was fun. My son says it's okay. You know?
all right. I mean, he's actually flying the aircraft that they were in, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, and his unit actually did most of the flying.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, he was a West Coast guy, and then he's in Portugal now. He's doing a staff.
Good
assignment.
blend of CGI and actual flying.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did a lot of those things, and then I also think they put some aircraft a little closer than they actually were.
Yeah.
Which I support.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Yeah.
Yeah. Cruz is a helicopter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I think about that guy. He's a little bit off.
He is off.
Yeah.
I have to agree.
If I had to choose between you flying a helicopter and him, I'm going with you every day of the week, twice
Yeah.
on Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, it's like, I ran into, I don't know him, but I went to a book signing for Tim Kennedy.
Yeah.
And
He's crazy.
I was wearing actually this hat
Yeah.
right here, right? And he saw it and he's like, "Oh, I like your hat." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I was with the 160th, for like 17 years." And he goes,
Yeah.
"Really?" So we start talking a little bit. Turns out we were in Iraq at the same time down at the MSS. I blew a wall down with a Chinook. I was full of Rangers. I come in and blew the wall down.
Yeah.
And they had to go guard it and stuff. But he's like, "Hey, I fly helicopters." Like, oh,
Tim flew helicopters for a very short period of time. I think he's given that hobby up.
was that R-44, right? Little Robbie.
I think he had a couple buddies that have helicopters, and they're basically commuting around Austin in these little R-44s, which conceptually, I love the idea of that.
Yeah.
If you can be really current and competent.
Right.
Tim has about 500 things going on every day, and I'm not sure that flying a helicopter should be one.
Right. And that's what he said. He's like, how many flight hours you got? I said, about close to 7,000. He's like, I got like 40.
Yeah. So we're basically the same.
Yeah, it's the same. But, yeah.
Yeah, he's, goddamn. I do jujitsu, and I made the mistake of training with him once for about 30 minutes. It was a bespoke experience, for
Oh, I
sure.
bet.
Yeah, he knows what the fuck he is doing. We'll leave it like that. I'm going to let you go and enjoy some time with your wife. We've been at this like 2.5 hours. What have we not covered that you want to talk about?
Pretty much we did it. I mean,
When's the book come out?
So the book comes out. The date I'm not sure. It says middle of September.
So this month.
This month, right? So it's I've heard the 15th.
What are you holding up?
21st.
Michael, just yell. I'm not going to ever give Michael a microphone. What's 8 mean?
September 8th on Amazon.
So your book comes out September 8th on Amazon. You've just learned something new today.
Maybe. Right?
Maybe.
And the reason I say that is it's changed. Like if you go on every day, I go on and look, and it's a different day. So it must be like a computer model that
Well,
says
this podcast will be out in September, and it'll be after the 8th. So by the time people are hearing this, if it does come out in September, you'll get a little Rolex push to the right and put it into October. It'll be out.
Now it is available for pre-order, by the way, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that kind of stuff. And that helps me, believe it or not, in the because the first day that it's up for sale, all those pre-sales count as one day.
Oh, for the
So,
rankings or whatever that New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah, I'm not likely to get there, but
You never know.
it's fun. Yeah, so
that novel series you're going to write about gay vampires is going to just right at the apex. I can see it. Bestseller.
I could probably, maybe you could be the model for that for me.
I'm willing to consult. I have no expertise whatsoever, but I will make some shit up.
All right, that works for me.
Other than that, thank you so much for making the time. I love. As soon as you reached out, I was like, yes, I want to sit down and talk with you. Like I said, to me, the biggest thing is it's so easy to focus on super small units and the things that they're able to accomplish sometimes, and just totally lose track of what it takes and the people that are working as hard as they absolutely can, especially when we call and go, hey, so things have gone terribly wrong. We've made a terrible error coming here, and we would like you to come get us now.
Yeah. It's my biggest satisfying missions really were CASEVACs.
Yeah.
Because it's almost always under fire.
Yeah.
You go in there and I think out of, I don't know how many I've done, it's 20 or 30. And I can only think of one that didn't make it. So, and he was dead before he got on board.
I mean, imagine the impact that has on the family members that still have their service member left to continue their life with them. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
Easily forgotten because it doesn't get the notoriety that I think that it should, which is why when you reached out, I was like, fuck yeah, we're going to do this.
Yeah. And I appreciate it. If it weren't for, Clay.
Yeah.
I heard some stories he gave you and it's like, I was there. I was there for that. I remember that.
Yeah.
And so it was nice.
No, he was awesome. Thank you so much for the time. Like I said, I totally appreciate it, and enjoy Glacier tomorrow.
It's going to be
It's
good.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.